How people in the 1700s smelled and why no one noticed the year was 1743, and Margaret Whitworth awoke in her modest bedchamber above her husband's bakery in the market town of Ashford, Kent. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the small diamond-paned window, casting geometric shadows across the wooden floor that had not seen a proper scrubbing in several months. Margaret stretched beneath her woolen blankets, feeling the familiar roughness of her linen shift against her skin, the same shift she had worn for the past week. In the world Margaret inhabited, the concept of daily bathing was not merely unusual. It was considered dangerous. The learned physicians of her time, with their powdered wigs and serious demeanor, warned that frequent washing opened the pores to harmful humors and disease. Water, they proclaimed from their positions of authority, was a treacherous substance that could upset the delicate balance of the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Margaret rose from her bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden planks. She walked to the small washstand in the corner of her room, where a pewter basin sat alongside a pitcher of water that had been drawn from the well 3 days prior. The water had a slightly murky quality, tinged with the earthy taste of the well's depths, but this was perfectly normal. Clean, clear water was a luxury reserved for the wealthy, and even they did not trust it entirely. She dipped her fingers into the cool water and dabbed at her face and hands. This constituted her morning ablutions. The water she used sparingly for it would need to last several more days. After this brief contact with moisture, Margaret reached for a piece of rough linen cloth and patted her skin dry, though dry was a relative term. A thin film of yesterday's activities remained on her skin. The flour dust from the bakery, the smoke from the hearth, the natural oils her body had produced during the night. Margaret's hair, a mousy brown color that had not been washed in over a month, was carefully arranged beneath her linen cap. The cap served multiple purposes beyond mere modesty. It contained the natural oils that had accumulated in her hair, oils that were considered beneficial for maintaining healthy locks. Regular washing, the common wisdom held, would strip away these protective oils and leave one's hair brittle and damaged. The process of getting dressed was methodical and deliberate. First came the stays, the precursor to the modern corset, which had been worn continuously for weeks. The stays, made of sturdy canvas and reinforced with whalebone, had molded to Margaret's body shape over time. They carried the accumulated sense of daily life, perspiration, cooking, smoke, and the general mustiness of fabric that never fully aired out. Over the stays went the same linen shift she had worn to bed, now serving as her undergarment for the day. The shift was the closest thing to cleanliness in Margaret's wardrobe, as it was occasionally washed, perhaps once every 2 weeks, weather and water permitting. The shift absorbed the oils and moisture from her skin, creating a barrier between her body and her outer clothing. Her petticoat came next, a sturdy woolen garment dyed a practical brown color that would not easily show stains. The petticoat had been her constant companion for months, gathering the scents of the bakery, the street, and the various places she conducted her daily business. Like all of her clothing, it was considered clean as long as the visible outer layer appeared presentable. Finally, Margaret donned her gown, a serviceable garment of brown wool that had been her Sunday best before being relegated to everyday wear. The gown's fabric held the accumulated aromas of countless days, the yeast and flour from the bakery, the wood smoke from the hearth, the occasional splash of ale from the tavern next door, and the general mustiness that pervaded all indoor spaces during the long winter months. As Margaret prepared for her day, she was entirely unconscious of what modern sensibilities would consider an overwhelming array of odors emanating from her person. Her olfactory system, like that of all her contemporaries, had adapted to a world where bathing was infrequent and clothing was rarely washed. The human nose, remarkably adaptive, had become accustomed to levels of body odor that would be considered intolerable by later standards. Margaret's preparation routine included one final touch that she considered essential for proper hygiene powder. She reached for a small wooden box containing a mixture of ground orris root rice powder and dried lavender. This powder was carefully applied to her hair beneath her cap and dusted lightly on her neck and wrists. The powder served multiple purposes. It absorbed excess oils, provided a pleasant fragrance, and was believed to have medicinal properties that could ward off disease. The concept of scent in Margaret's world was complex and layered. Pleasant fragrances were not meant to mask odors but to complement the natural scents of the human body. The wealthy might use expensive perfumes made from exotic flowers and spices, but these were layered over, not in place of the fundamental human smells that everyone carried. As Margaret descended the narrow wooden stairs to begin her day in the bakery, she passed her husband Thomas, who was already at work kneading dough for the morning's bread. Thomas, like Margaret, carried his own collection of scents: the sourdough starter that lived permanently under his fingernails, the wood ash from the oven, the wool of his clothes that had absorbed months of bakery aromas, and his own natural human scent that had intensified over the weeks since his last bath. Neither Margaret nor Thomas was aware of the other's smell in any negative sense. Their noses had become so accustomed to these levels of human and environmental odor that they ceased to register them as anything unusual. This was the olfactory reality of their world, a world where the absence of smell would have seemed unnatural and possibly unhealthy. The bakery itself was a symphony of aromas that would assault modern sensibilities but felt like home to Margaret and Thomas. The dominant scent was that of bread and yeast, but underneath lay deeper, more complex notes: the mustiness of flour stored in sacks for months, the smoke from the wood-fired oven that never fully cleared from the air, the dampness of stone walls that rarely dried completely, and the accumulated human sense of customers who visited throughout each day. Margaret began her morning tasks completely unaware that her body was producing what modern people would consider an overwhelming olfactory experience. As she moved about the bakery, she left a trail of scent that included not only her unwashed body and clothes, but also the various substances she handled: flour that created clouds of particles that settled on her skin, and clothes, the metal of coins that left their distinctive smell on her fingers, and the wood ash she used to clean the bakery surfaces. The customers who visited the bakery throughout the morning were equally fragrant in their own ways. Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife, carried the distinctive scents of coal smoke and hot metal that permeated her husband's trade. Young Billy Cooper, who worked in the stables, brought with him the earthy animal scents of horses and hay. The widow Mrs. Fairfax, despite her higher social station, was no less aromatic, her expensive wool dress having absorbed months of hearth smoke and her own natural human scents. What is remarkable about this olfactory landscape is not just the intensity of the smells, but the complete lack of consciousness about them among the people of the time. Each person in Margaret's world carried what modern people would consider an overwhelming personal scent, yet none of them were aware of it as anything unusual or offensive. Their noses had adapted to filter out these constant background odors, much as people today become nose blind to the scents of their own homes. The social implications of this olfactory adaptation were profound. Status was not determined by cleanliness in the modern sense, but by the quality and expense of the fragrances one could afford to layer over one's natural human scent. A wealthy merchant might smell of expensive rosewater and imported spices, but underneath these costly additions, his fundamental human aroma was no different from that of his servants. Margaret's world was one where smell served as a form of identification and communication that modern people have largely lost. She could identify regular customers by their distinctive scent signatures long before she saw them. The approaching footsteps of the tanner could be detected by the leather and chemical smells he carried, while the village priest was announced by the particular combination of incense, old parchment, and wool that surrounded him. This olfactory intimacy extended to all aspects of life. Families knew each other's scents as intimately as they knew each other's voices. Children could find their parents in a crowd by smell alone, and spouses recognized each other's approach by the familiar combination of personal and occupational aromas they carried. As Margaret worked through her morning grinding flour and shaping loaves, she was participating in an elaborate dance of scents that defined her social world. Each task she performed added new layers to her personal aromatic signature: the flour that coated her hands and arms, the wood smoke that clung to her clothes as she tended the oven, the sweat that dampened her shift as she worked in the bakery's heat. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm, punctuated by the arrival of customers seeking their daily bread. Each interaction was a complex olfactory exchange, though none of the participants were consciously aware of it. Margaret's nose processed information about each customer's health, occupation, and social status through the scents they carried, while they in turn unconsciously cataloged her own aromatic information. Young Mary Fletcher arrived mid-morning to purchase bread for her employer's household. Mary worked as a scullery maid in one of the town's grander houses, and her scent reflected her occupation soap. From the endless dishwashing she performed, the damp mustiness of the scullery where she worked, and the particular combination of cooking odors that clung to her clothes. Yet underneath these occupational markers lay her own human scent, unwashed and natural, that had been building for the weeks since her last bath. The transaction between Margaret and Mary was conducted with the usual pleasantries, neither woman consciously aware of the olfactory information they were exchanging. Margaret's experienced nose automatically processed Mary's scent signature, noting the girl's good health and the quality of the household where she worked, while Mary unconsciously registered Margaret's familiar bakery aroma as a comforting sign of normalcy and routine. As the morning wore on, the bakery filled with the accumulated scents of its visitors. Each person who entered left behind traces of their personal aromatic signature, creating a complex layering of human and environmental odors that would build throughout the day. The stone walls and wooden surfaces of the bakery absorbed these scents, becoming a repository of olfactory memory that connected each day to the days that came before. Margaret moved through this scented landscape with the unconscious grace of someone completely adapted to her environment. She was neither bothered by the intensity of the smells around her, nor conscious of the aromatic impact of her own presence. This was simply the natural state of her world, a world where the human body was accepted as naturally fragrant and where the absence of scent would have seemed artificial and disturbing. While Margaret Whitworth conducted her modest morning routine in her baker's quarters 20 miles away in the grand estate of Pemberton Hall, Lady Constance Pemberton was engaging in what passed for an elaborate toilette among the aristocracy of 1743. The contrast between their morning rituals would seem stark to modern observers, yet both women shared the same fundamental relationship with cleanliness and scent that defined their era. Lady Pemberton's bedchamber was a study in expensive luxury that nonetheless operated under the same principles of hygiene that governed Margaret's simpler world. The room was large and well appointed, with silk hangings, polished wood furniture, and silver appointments that gleamed in the morning light. Yet for all its grandeur, the chamber had not been thoroughly aired in months, and the accumulated scents of daily life hung heavy in the still air. The lady herself had spent the night in a magnificent four-poster bed surrounded by heavy curtains that had been drawn closed to maintain warmth and privacy. These curtains, made of expensive silk and embroidered with gold thread, had not been washed in over a year. They had absorbed not only Lady Pemberton's personal scent, but also the aromatic traces of every night's sleep, the powder she wore in her hair, the pomade she applied to her skin, the natural oils her body produced, and the accumulated mustiness of fabric that never fully aired. Lady Pemberton awoke, as was her custom, when her lady's maid Sarah drew back the bed curtains and opened the diamond-paned windows to let in the morning air. The lady's maid herself was an interesting study in the complex hierarchy of scent that existed in aristocratic households. Sarah was better washed than most servants, receiving a full bath, perhaps once a month, rather than the quarterly washing that was standard among the lower classes. Her clothes, while simple, were changed more frequently than those of ordinary servants, perhaps every few days rather than weekly. Yet even Sarah, with her relatively elevated position in the household hierarchy, carried the distinctive aromatic signature of her station. Her hands smelled permanently of the various cosmetics and powders she applied to her mistress: rice powder rouge made from cochineal insects and the exotic pomades imported from France. Her clothes carried the sense of the aristocratic world she served, expensive perfumes, the mustiness of grand rooms that were heated by massive fireplaces, and the particular combination of luxury and neglect that characterized aristocratic hygiene. Lady Pemberton's morning routine began not with washing, but with the careful application of powder. Sarah helped her mistress sit up in bed, then began the elaborate process of preparing her for the day. The first step was to examine Lady Pemberton's face and hands for any visible dirt or oil that might have accumulated during the night. This examination was purely visual. The goal was to achieve an appearance of cleanliness rather than actual cleanliness in the modern sense. Any visible soil was removed not with water, but with soft linen cloths and a variety of cosmetic preparations. Sarah used a cloth dampened with rose water to dab at Lady Pemberton's face, removing any obvious marks, while leaving the underlying layer of accumulated oils and cosmetics undisturbed. The rose water was expensive and imported a luxury that marked Lady Pemberton's high social status, but it was used sparingly and primarily for its fragrance rather than its cleansing properties. The most important part of Lady Pemberton's morning routine was the application of powder to her hair. Her hair, like that of all fashionable women of her class, had not been washed in several months. Instead, it was maintained through the liberal application of various powders and pomades that were believed to keep it healthy and attractive. Sarah carefully removed Lady Pemberton's lace nightcap, revealing hair that was heavily coated with the accumulated residue of weeks of powder applications. The hair powder used by aristocratic women was a complex mixture of finely ground starch, orris root, and various perfumed substances. In Lady Pemberton's case, the powder was tinted with a small amount of blue to achieve the fashionable gray-white color that was preferred at court. The powder served multiple purposes. It absorbed the oils that naturally accumulated in unwashed hair, provided a pleasant fragrance, and created the elaborate sculptural hairstyles that were the height of fashion. Sarah began the process of repowdering Lady Pemberton's hair, first brushing out the previous day's accumulation and then carefully applying fresh powder with a large soft brush. The process created clouds of scented dust that filled the bedchamber, settling on every surface and adding to the room's complex, aromatic atmosphere. Lady Pemberton breathed in this powder-laden air without concern. Indeed, the scent of fresh hair powder was considered one of the most pleasant and refined fragrances a lady could carry. The powdering process revealed the true complexity of aristocratic hair care in the 18th century. Lady Pemberton's hair was not merely powdered, but was constructed into an elaborate architecture of curls, pins, and false pieces that would remain in place for weeks at a time. This hairstyle, created by a professional hairdresser who visited the estate weekly, was a work of art that could not be dismantled for something as mundane as washing. The hair construction itself was held in place by a combination of pomades, pins, and the natural oils that accumulated over time. The pomades were made from animal fats, scented with expensive flowers and spices. Rose, jasmine, bergamot, and ambergris were particularly prized. These pomades, when combined with the natural oils of the scalp and the various powders applied daily, created a distinctive aristocratic hair scent that was immediately recognizable to those familiar with fashionable society. Once Lady Pemberton's hair was properly powdered and arranged, Sarah turned her attention to her mistress's body. The concept of bodily cleanliness among the aristocracy was complex and ritualized, but it bore little resemblance to modern notions of hygiene. Lady Pemberton's skin was not washed with water, which was considered harmful and potentially dangerous. Instead, Sarah used a variety of soft cloths and scented powders to maintain what was considered proper cleanliness. The process began with the careful removal of Lady Pemberton's silk nightgown, which was worn for several nights before being replaced. The nightgown itself was a repository of accumulated scents. The expensive perfumes Lady Pemberton favored, the natural oils her skin produced during sleep, and the aromatic traces of the various cosmetics she wore. The silk fabric, being more delicate than the wool and linen worn by lower classes, was changed more frequently, but it still carried several nights' worth of accumulated human scent. Sarah then began the process of preparing Lady Pemberton's skin for the day. This involved not washing in the modern sense, but rather the careful application of various powders and pomades designed to enhance the natural state of the skin. Sarah used a soft brush to apply rice powder to Lady Pemberton's neck, shoulders, and décolletage, creating a smooth white appearance that was considered the height of beauty. The rice powder served multiple purposes in the aristocratic beauty routine. It absorbed excess oils from the skin, provided a smooth, uniform appearance, and carried the delicate scent of rice that was considered particularly refined. The powder was often mixed with ground pearls or other expensive substances that added to its prestige and supposed beneficial properties. Over the rice powder, Sarah applied a light dusting of rouge to Lady Pemberton's cheeks and lips. The rouge was made from cochineal insects, imported from the Americas, ground into a fine powder and mixed with various binding agents. The application of rouge was an art form in itself, requiring skill to achieve the subtle gradations of color that suggested natural beauty rather than obvious artifice. The final step in Lady Pemberton's morning routine was the application of perfume. Unlike modern perfumes, which are designed to replace natural body scent, 18th century perfumes were meant to complement and enhance the natural human aroma. Lady Pemberton's perfume was a complex blend of floral and animal scents, rose, jasmine, and orange blossom, combined with musk, ambergris, and civet. These animal-derived scents were particularly prized because they were believed to harmonize with natural human pheromones, creating an attractive and alluring combination. The perfume was applied not to mask Lady Pemberton's natural scent, but to create a sophisticated layering of aromas that would announce her presence and social status to everyone she encountered. Sarah applied the perfume sparingly to Lady Pemberton's wrists, behind her ears, and to the lace handkerchief that would accompany her throughout the day. The scent was strong and complex, designed to project over the other human aromas that filled any social gathering. In a world where everyone carried significant personal scent, a lady's perfume needed to be distinctive and memorable to achieve its social purpose. The process of dressing Lady Pemberton was equally elaborate and aromatic. Her undergarments, while changed more frequently than those of lower classes, still carried the accumulated scents of several days' wear. Her stays, like those worn by all women of the period, had been worn continuously for weeks and had molded to her body shape while absorbing the complex mixture of perspiration powder and perfume that characterized aristocratic personal scent. Lady Pemberton's gown for the day was a masterpiece of expensive fabric and elaborate construction. Made from silk imported from China and embroidered with silver thread, the gown represented months of skilled labor and a small fortune in materials. Yet despite its cost and beauty, the gown operated under the same principles of cleanliness that governed all clothing of the period. It was considered clean as long as the visible surface appeared presentable. The gown had been worn several times before and would be worn several times again before being considered dirty enough to require attention. Each wearing added new layers to its aromatic signature, the scents of the rooms where it had been worn, the perfumes and powders of its wearer, and the accumulated traces of social interactions. The silk fabric, being more delicate than wool or linen, was treated with special care, but this care focused on preserving its appearance rather than achieving cleanliness in the modern sense. As Lady Pemberton prepared to leave her bedchamber and begin her day, she was unconscious of the complex aromatic signature she carried. To her refined nose, she smelled exactly as a lady of quality should smell of expensive powder, delicate perfumes, and the subtle human scents that indicated health and vitality. The idea that she might smell unpleasant or offensive would have been incomprehensible to her. She was following the most advanced hygiene practices of her time and social class. The contrast between Lady Pemberton's elaborate morning routine and Margaret Whitworth's simple preparations was significant in terms of time expense and social meaning, but both women emerged from their toilettes carrying similar levels of human scent. The difference lay not in the presence or absence of body odor, but in the quality and expense of the fragrances that layered over their natural human aromas. Lady Pemberton's day would be spent in the company of other aristocrats, each carrying their own complex mixture of expensive perfumes, powders, and accumulated human scents. Together, they would create an olfactory environment that was both intensely aromatic and completely normal to their adapted senses. The grand rooms of Pemberton Hall would fill with the layered sense of fashionable society, creating an atmosphere that would seem overwhelming to modern sensibilities, but felt like the natural order of things to those who lived within it. While Lady Pemberton prepared for a day of genteel social activities and Margaret Whitworth tended to her rural bakery, the great city of London was awakening to its own daily symphony of scents that would challenge even the most adapted 18th century nose. The year 1743 found London at the height of its power as a commercial center, with nearly 750,000 inhabitants packed into an area that had grown organically over centuries without any coherent plan for sanitation or public health. The morning mist that rose from the Thames carried with it a complex bouquet of urban aromas that announced the city's presence long before its buildings came into view. The river itself served multiple functions for London's inhabitants. It was simultaneously the city's highway, its sewer, its source of drinking water, and its dumping ground for industrial waste. The Thames of 1743 bore little resemblance to the relatively clean waterway that modern visitors might expect. It was a thick, slow-moving mixture of water, human waste, industrial effluent, and the decomposing remains of everything the city chose to discard. Along the river's banks where the tide twice daily deposited its burden of urban refuse scavengers known as mudlarks began their daily search for anything of value. These were primarily children and elderly women who had no other means of survival, and they worked barefoot in the thick aromatic mud that lined the Thames. The mud itself was a repository of London's olfactory history, centuries of human and animal waste decomposing organic matter, industrial chemicals, and the occasional human corpse that had found its way into the river. The mudlarks who worked these banks had developed an extraordinary tolerance for smells that would overwhelm visitors to the city. They could distinguish by scent alone between different types of refuse, identifying potentially valuable items buried in the mud by their distinctive aromas. Old Martha Gibbons, who had worked the banks near London Bridge for over 30 years, could smell the difference between a piece of rotting leather that might be salvaged and one that was beyond recovery, between a bone that might have marrow in it and one that was dry and worthless. Moving inland from the river, the streets of London presented their own olfactory challenges. The narrow lanes and alleys that made up most of the city had not been designed for the population they now served. Originally laid out in medieval times for a much smaller population, these streets were now choked with humanity, animals, and the waste products of both. The cobblestones where they existed were slippery with a mixture of mud, animal dung, human waste, and the various liquids that leaked from shops and houses. The practice of waste disposal in London was both primitive and public. Most houses had no private sanitation facilities, and residents relied on public privies, or more commonly simply threw their waste into the streets. The cry of Gardez-vous, a corruption of the French garde à l'eau, was supposed to warn passers-by before chamber pots were emptied from upper-story windows, but the warning was often perfunctory or absent altogether. The result was that London's streets served as open sewers with human and animal waste mixing with rainwater to create a thick aromatic soup that coated the cobblestones and splashed onto the clothing of anyone who ventured outside. The smell of this mixture was one of the defining characteristics of urban life in the 18th century, yet Londoners had become so accustomed to it that they barely registered its presence. Street vendors added their own aromatic contributions to the urban environment. Fishmongers sold their wares from wooden carts, the fish having been caught days earlier and transported to London without refrigeration. The smell of fish in various stages of decomposition was a constant presence in the markets, mixed with the scents of rotting vegetables, spoiled meat, and the various spices and herbs used to disguise the taste of food that was past its prime. The famous cry of fresh fish that echoed through London streets was more aspirational than accurate. The fish sold by street vendors was typically anything but fresh, having spent days in transport and storage without any means of preservation beyond salting. Yet customers accepted this state of affairs as normal, their palates and noses having adapted to levels of spoilage that would be considered dangerous in later eras. Butcher shops contributed their own distinctive aromas to the urban mix. Meat was typically sold from open-fronted shops, where carcasses hung in full view of the street, attracting flies, and beginning the process of decomposition that would continue in customers' homes. The butchers themselves were aromatic characters, their clothes permanently stained with blood and their hands carrying the distinctive smell of raw meat that no amount of washing could completely remove. The practice of slaughtering animals within the city limits meant that the sounds and smells of death were never far from London's residents. Cattle, pigs, and sheep were driven through the streets to slaughterhouses located throughout the city, leaving behind trails of dung and the distinctive scent of frightened animals. The slaughterhouses themselves were sources of intense aromatic experiences as the smells of blood, offal, and decomposing organic matter mixed with the smoke from rendering fires. In the narrow confines of Pudding Lane, where the Great Fire of London had begun nearly 80 years earlier, a young apprentice named Tom Fletcher began his daily routine at his master's tallow chandlery. The production of candles from animal fat was one of London's most aromatic trades, involving the melting down of suet and other animal fats in large vats that filled the workshop with thick, greasy smoke. Tom had been apprenticed to Master Hawkins for 3 years, and his clothing had absorbed so much of the distinctive smell of rendering fat that he could be identified by scent alone from several streets away. His hair rarely washed, and constantly exposed to the fatty vapors of the chandlery had taken on a permanent greasy quality that no amount of brushing could remove. Yet Tom was proud of his trade. Candles were essential for lighting homes and shops throughout the city, and a skilled chandler could make a good living. The process of candle making filled the workshop with aromatic complexity that went far beyond simple animal fat. Different types of fat produced different smells. When rendered beef tallow had a rich, meaty aroma, while mutton fat carried a more pungent, woolly scent. The addition of various substances to improve the candle's burning qualities added further layers to the olfactory experience: beeswax for expensive candles, whale oil for the finest products, and various herbs and spices that were supposed to make the candles burn more cleanly. Tom's workday began before dawn as he stoked the fires under the rendering vats and began the process of melting the previous day's collection of fat scraps. The scraps came from butchers throughout the city, collected by Tom and other apprentices in wheelbarrows that left aromatic trails through London's streets. The fat was often several days old and beginning to turn rancid, adding a sharp, acrid note to the workshop's already complex atmosphere. As the fat melted, Tom used a large wooden paddle to stir the mixture and remove any pieces of meat or bone that might contaminate the final product. The stirring process released clouds of greasy vapor that coated everything in the workshop: the walls, the tools, Tom's clothes, and Tom himself. By the end of each workday, he carried so much of the chandlery scent that his presence could be detected long before he came into view. The customers who visited Master Hawkins' shop were themselves aromatic testimonies to their various trades and social positions. Mrs. Blackwood, the fishmonger's wife, carried the permanent scent of fish scales and brine that no amount of washing could completely remove. Her hands, stained yellow from handling fish, smelled of the sea and decomposition in equal measure. Yet she was a valued customer, purchasing candles regularly for her shop and home. Young Jimmy Morrison, who worked as a crossing sweeper, clearing horse dung and refuse from the paths of paying customers, arrived each week to purchase the cheapest tallow candles for his family's single room. Jimmy's occupation was reflected in his aromatic signature, a complex mixture of horse manure, street mud, and the various types of refuse he encountered in his daily work. His clothes, which were rarely changed and never properly washed, had absorbed months of exposure to London's street-level odors. The contrast between different social classes was immediately apparent to the trained nose. Yet all Londoners shared certain basic aromatic characteristics. Even the wealthy merchants who lived in grand houses along the Thames carried the fundamental scent of urban life: the smoke from coal fires, the mustiness of poorly ventilated buildings, and the accumulated human odors that resulted from infrequent bathing and rarely washed clothing. Coal smoke was perhaps the most pervasive scent in London, as nearly every building burned coal for heat and cooking. The smoke from thousands of chimneys created a permanent haze over the city that residents called the London particular. This smoke carried with it not only the smell of burning coal, but also the various substances that were burned along with it: garbage, human waste, and anything else that residents chose to dispose of in their fires. The smoke settled on every surface in the city, coating buildings, clothing, and people with a fine layer of soot that gave London its distinctive gray appearance. Residents' clothing gradually darkened with accumulated soot, and their skin took on the grayish tinge that marked them as city dwellers. The smoke also penetrated deep into people's hair and clothing, creating a permanent aromatic marker of urban life that could not be washed away. The streets themselves were repositories of olfactory memory, holding the accumulated sense of decades of human activity. The cobblestones where they existed were porous enough to absorb liquids and organic matter, creating a permanent aromatic record of everything that had been spilled, dropped, or deposited on them. The wooden buildings that lined the streets were equally absorbent, their timber frameworks soaking up smoke, cooking smells, and human odors until the buildings themselves became sources of complex, aromatic experiences. In the narrow alleys behind the main streets, where the city's poorest residents lived in overcrowded tenements, the concentration of human scent reached levels that would be difficult for modern people to imagine. Entire families lived in single rooms, sharing their space with lodgers and sometimes farm animals that were kept for milk or eggs. The buildings had no sanitation facilities beyond shared privies and courtyards that served dozens of residents. These courtyards were centers of intense aromatic activity as residents conducted their daily business in semi-public spaces. Washing was done in communal areas, using water that was often dirty before use began. Cooking took place over shared fires that burned whatever fuel residents could afford, coal when possible, but more often wood scraps, paper, and refuse. The smoke from these fires mixed with the steam from cooking and washing to create an atmosphere thick with human activity. The people who lived in these conditions had developed extraordinary tolerance for smells that would be overwhelming to those accustomed to cleaner environments. Children who grew up in the alleys could navigate by scent alone, identifying their home building by its distinctive aromatic signature among dozens of similar structures. Adults could determine the health, occupation, and social status of strangers by the complex mixture of scents they carried. In a modest house on Drury Lane, the family of William Hartwell, a respectable clerk in a merchant's office, was conducting their weekly ritual of personal maintenance, what passed for bathing in middle-class London society of 1743. The Hartwells represented the growing merchant class that sat between the aristocracy and the laboring poor, and their approach to cleanliness reflected both their aspirations to gentility and the practical limitations of their circumstances. William's wife, Elizabeth, had spent the morning preparing for the family's weekly washing ritual. This preparation was elaborate and time-consuming, requiring the hauling of water from the public well several streets away, the heating of this water over the kitchen fire, and the careful rationing of soap, which was expensive and heavily taxed by the government. The soap itself was harsh and caustic, made from animal fats and lye, and it was considered too harsh for regular use on human skin. The Hartwell family's approach to bathing was typical of their social class, thorough but infrequent. Each family member would receive a complete washing once per week, usually on Saturday evening in preparation for Sunday church services. Between these weekly ablutions, personal hygiene consisted of washing hands and face with cold water and the occasional use of scented powders and pomades. Elizabeth began the ritual by washing the children first, starting with their youngest 6-year-old Mary. The little girl had not been properly washed in a week, and her small body carried the accumulated evidence of a child's active life in 18th century London. Her hair, protected by a linen cap during the day, was matted with the natural oils that had built up over the week, mixed with the dust and soot that permeated every aspect of urban life. The washing process was methodical and thorough by the standards of the time. Elizabeth used a large wooden tub that served multiple purposes in the household washing clothes, preparing food, and the weekly bathing ritual. The water heated over the kitchen fire in smaller vessels and then poured into the tub was precious and would be used by each family member in turn, with fresh hot water added as needed. Little Mary's washing began with her hair, which Elizabeth carefully combed with a fine-toothed wooden comb designed to remove not only tangles, but also the lice that were considered a normal part of childhood. The discovery of lice was not alarming. Nearly every child in London carried them, and their presence was seen as a sign of health rather than poor hygiene. Elizabeth methodically removed the small creatures and their eggs, a process that Mary endured with the patience of long practice. The hair washing itself involved a careful application of soap mixed with water, creating a thick, grayish lather that Elizabeth worked through Mary's hair with her fingers. The soap's harsh chemical composition made the process somewhat unpleasant, but it was effective at removing the week's accumulation of oils, dirt, and other substances. The rinsing process required several applications of clean water, each one revealing Mary's natural hair color beneath the accumulated grime. Mary's body was washed with similar thoroughness, Elizabeth using a rough cloth to scrub away the layers of dirt that had accumulated on the child's skin. The removal of a week's worth of grime revealed skin that was pale and somewhat raw from the harsh soap, but Elizabeth considered this evidence of effective cleaning. The water in the tub, which had started clear, gradually took on a murky brown color as it absorbed the various substances that had been coating Mary's body. The process of washing Mary revealed the complex relationship that 18th century people had with their bodies and bodily cleanliness. While the weekly washing was thorough, it was also somewhat traumatic. The harsh soap stung the skin, the rough cloth caused abrasions, and the entire process was conducted in a cold room that made the warm water both welcome and insufficient. Mary endured the washing because it was expected, but she did not enjoy it, and she understood that this discomfort was the price of cleanliness. After Mary came her older brother James, aged 10, whose washing revealed the different standards applied to boys and girls. James's hair was shorter and therefore easier to wash, but it was also more thoroughly contaminated with the results of his more adventurous play. Boys of James's age were expected to spend their time outdoors, exploring the streets and alleys of London, and James's body told the story of a week's worth of such exploration. James's hands and feet required particular attention as they showed the effects of his daily activities. His feet, usually protected by leather shoes that were expensive and therefore worn until they fell apart, were stained black with the accumulated dirt of London streets. His hands carried the distinctive marks of his daily life ink stains from his lessons, burns from helping tend the fire, and the general discoloration that came from handling the various objects that made up his world. The washing of James also revealed the different expectations society had for boys regarding scent and cleanliness. While girls were expected to maintain a more delicate aromatic profile, boys were allowed, even expected, to carry the scents of their activities. James's natural boy smell, compounded by a week of play and exploration, was considered normal and healthy. The washing was intended to remove only the most obvious dirt, not to eliminate his natural human scent. William Hartwell's own washing was the most elaborate of the family rituals, reflecting both his status as head of household and his need to maintain a respectable appearance for his work in the merchant's office. William's occupation required him to interact with customers and suppliers from various social classes, and his personal appearance and scent were important markers of his respectability and success. William's weekly washing began with his face and hands, which received the most attention because they were the most visible parts of his body in his daily interactions. His hands, which handled money documents and various commercial products throughout the week, carried the accumulated sense of his occupation. Ink from the quill pens he used daily had stained his fingers a permanent brown color that no amount of washing could completely remove. The washing of William's hair was a particularly involved process, as men of his social class wore their natural hair rather than the elaborate wigs favored by the aristocracy. His hair, which had not been washed in a week, was heavily coated with the pomade he used to maintain a respectable appearance. The pomade, made from animal fats, scented with various herbs and flowers, served to keep his hair in place throughout the workday, but it also attracted dust and other particles from the urban environment. Elizabeth worked the harsh soap through William's hair, creating a thick lather that gradually removed the accumulated pomade dust and natural oils. The process required several applications of soap and thorough rinsing to achieve the level of cleanliness that William considered appropriate for his social station. The final result was hair that felt clean and looked respectable, though it would begin accumulating new layers of pomade and urban grime as soon as William resumed his daily routine. William's body washing revealed the physical evidence of his daily life in 18th century London. His skin showed the effects of exposure to coal smoke, a grayish tinge that was considered normal for city dwellers. His clothes had protected most of his body from direct contact with urban pollutants, but his neck and wrists showed the accumulated effects of daily exposure to London's atmospheric conditions. The water used for William's washing, which had already served for both children, was now thoroughly contaminated with the family's weekly accumulation of dirt and oils. Yet it would continue to be used for Elizabeth's own washing, with additional hot water added to maintain an acceptable temperature. The concept of using fresh water for each person was economically impossible for a family of the Hartwells' social status. Elizabeth's own washing was conducted with the efficiency of long practice and the understanding that she would make do with water that had already served the rest of her family. Her approach to personal cleanliness reflected the complex expectations placed on women of her social class. She needed to maintain an appearance of respectability and cleanliness, but she also needed to be practical about the resources available to her. Elizabeth's hair washing was perhaps the most challenging aspect of her weekly routine. Women's hair in the 18th century was expected to be elaborate and attractive, but it was also expected to be maintained with minimal washing. Elizabeth's hair had not been thoroughly washed in a week, and during that time it had been dressed with various pomades and powders designed to maintain its appearance and manage its natural oils. The process of washing Elizabeth's hair required careful attention to preserving its condition while removing the accumulated substances that had been applied to it. She used a milder soap than what had been used for the rest of the family, and she was careful to work the lather gently through her hair to avoid damage. The rinsing process was thorough but conservative, designed to remove soap residue without stripping away all of the natural oils that were considered essential for healthy hair. Elizabeth's body washing was conducted with similar care and attention to maintaining her skin's condition. Women of her era used various preparations designed to preserve and enhance their natural complexion, and the weekly washing was intended to support rather than replace these daily beauty practices. She used a softer cloth than had been used for the rest of the family, and she was careful to avoid the harsh scrubbing that might damage her skin. The weekly washing ritual concluded with the careful disposal of the used water and the cleaning of the wooden tub that had served the entire family. The water, now thoroughly contaminated with a week's worth of accumulated human oils, dirt, and soap residue, was typically thrown into the street or alley behind the house, where it would join the various other liquids that flowed through London's primitive drainage system. The tub itself was cleaned with cold water and stored away until the following week's ritual. The soap, which was expensive and carefully rationed, was wrapped in cloth and stored in a dry place where it would be protected from moisture and pests. The towels and cloths used in the washing process were themselves washed and hung to dry, adding their own aromatic contribution to the household's olfactory environment. The Hartwell family's weekly washing ritual represented the height of middle-class hygiene practices in 18th century London. They were cleaner than the vast majority of their contemporaries, yet by modern standards they would still be considered remarkably dirty. The weekly cycle of accumulating grime, followed by thorough washing, created a rhythm of personal cleanliness that defined their relationship with their own bodies and their social environment. Between weekly washings, the family maintained their personal hygiene through various practices that were considered adequate for daily life. They washed their hands and faces with cold water when necessary, used scented powders to manage body odors, and changed their undergarments when they became obviously soiled. These daily practices were sufficient to maintain social acceptability within their community where everyone operated under similar constraints and expectations. The Hartwell family's approach to personal scent was complex and layered. They understood that complete elimination of human odor was neither possible nor desirable, and they focused instead on managing and enhancing their natural scents through the use of various cosmetic preparations. William used pomades and powders that complemented his natural masculine scent, while Elizabeth employed floral waters and herb-scented powders that enhanced her feminine appeal. The children's approach to personal scent was more straightforward. They were expected to smell like healthy, active children, and their weekly washing was intended to remove only the most obvious accumulations of dirt and grime. Between washings, they were allowed to develop the natural scents of childhood, which were considered normal and even desirable as signs of health and vitality. Dr. Cornelius Blackthorne stood in his consulting room on Harley Street examining Mrs. Pembleton, the wife of a prosperous wool merchant who had been suffering from what she described as nervous vapors accompanied by a persistent headache. The year was 1743, and Dr. Blackthorne represented the pinnacle of medical knowledge for his era, yet his understanding of hygiene and its relationship to health would seem primitive and even dangerous to modern medical practitioners. Dr. Blackthorne himself was an excellent example of the complex relationship between professional status and personal scent in 18th century London. As a physician catering to wealthy clients, he maintained an appearance of cleanliness and respectability that marked his elevated social position. Yet this appearance was achieved through methods that bore little resemblance to modern hygiene practices. The doctor's morning routine began with what he considered proper attention to his personal cleanliness. He washed his hands and face with cold water using a harsh soap that was believed to have medicinal properties. His hands, which came into contact with patients' bodies throughout the day, received particular attention, not because he understood the connection between hand hygiene and disease transmission, but because clean-appearing hands were considered a mark of professional respectability. Dr. Blackthorne's clothing reflected both his professional status and the medical theories of his time. He wore a long black coat that had not been washed in months, believing that the accumulated substances it had absorbed from his medical practice might actually enhance its protective properties. The coat carried the complex aromatic signature of his profession, the various herbs and chemicals he used in preparing medicines, the human sense of his patients, and the particular mustiness of a garment that was worn daily but rarely cleaned. His medical bag, a leather case that accompanied him on house calls throughout London, was itself a repository of professional scents. The bag contained various bottles and containers holding the medicines and tools of his trade, mercury preparations for treating syphilis, opium mixtures for pain relief, various herbal concoctions, and the bloodletting instruments that were central to 18th century medical practice. The process of bloodletting, which Dr. Blackthorne performed several times each day, created its own distinctive aromatic environment. The brass bowls used to catch patients' blood developed a permanent metallic smell that mixed with the iron scent of blood itself. The lancets and other cutting instruments, while kept sharp, were not sterilized. In any modern sense, they were simply wiped clean with cloth and stored in the leather case until needed again. Mrs. Pimbleton's examination revealed the typical aromatic complexity of a wealthy woman of the period. Despite her elevated social status and access to expensive cosmetic preparations, she carried the fundamental human sense that characterized all people of her era. Her elaborate gown, made from imported silk and decorated with costly lace, had absorbed weeks of wear, creating a complex layering of human and environmental odors beneath its expensive exterior. Dr. Blackthorne's examination of Mrs. Pimbleton involved procedures that would seem shocking to modern medical practitioners. He began by smelling her breath, which was considered an important diagnostic tool for determining the balance of humors in her body. Her breath carried the complex mixture of foods, drinks, and dental decay that characterized most adults of the period, along with the particular sweetness that Dr. Blackthorne associated with nervous disorders. The examination continued with Dr. Blackthorne smelling various parts of Mrs. Pimbleton's body through her clothing, seeking aromatic clues to her condition. Different diseases were believed to produce distinctive odors, and an experienced physician was expected to be able to diagnose conditions through his sense of smell alone. Mrs. Pimbleton's scent profile suggested to Dr. Blackthorne that she was suffering from an excess of melancholic humors, requiring treatment that would restore her body's natural balance. The treatment Dr. Blackthorne prescribed involved several approaches that reflected the medical understanding of his time. First, he recommended a bloodletting session to remove the excess humors that were causing Mrs. Pimbleton's symptoms. The bloodletting would be performed in her home using the brass bowl and lancets from his medical bag and would result in the removal of approximately a pint of blood. Second, Dr. Blackthorne prescribed a series of purgatives designed to cleanse Mrs. Pimbleton's system of accumulated toxins. These medicines, made from various herbs and minerals, would cause violent vomiting and diarrhea that were considered signs of effective treatment. The medicines themselves had distinctive and often unpleasant odors that would linger in Mrs. Pimbleton's breath and bodily excretions for days after administration. Finally, Dr. Blackthorne recommended changes to Mrs. Pimbleton's personal hygiene routine that he believed would support her recovery. Paradoxically, these recommendations included avoiding bathing during her treatment period, as water was believed to open the pores and allow harmful substances to enter her body. Instead, she was advised to use dry brushing techniques and aromatic powders to maintain cleanliness without exposing herself to the dangers of water. Dr. Blackthorne's medical practice brought him into contact with patients from all social classes, each carrying their own distinctive aromatic signatures that reflected their station in life and their state of health. The wealthy merchants and aristocrats who could afford his services carried the complex scents of expensive perfumes, cosmetics, and fine fabrics. But underneath these luxury additions lay the same fundamental human aromas that characterized all people of the era. The poor patients who occasionally sought Dr. Blackthorne's charity carried more intense versions of these same basic human scents, intensified by harder living conditions and less frequent access to cleaning materials. These patients' bodies told stories of their daily struggles: the coal dust that marked chimney sweeps, the fish scales and brine that clung to workers in the fish markets, the leather and chemical smells that identified tanners and other craftsmen. Dr. Blackthorne's diagnostic methods relied heavily on his ability to interpret these aromatic clues. He had trained his nose to distinguish between the healthy human scents that indicated proper humoral balance and the disease-related odors that suggested various medical conditions. A patient with consumption might carry the sweet, cloying scent that Dr. Blackthorne associated with lung disease, while someone suffering from liver problems might emit the particular musty odor that he had learned to recognize through years of practice. The doctor's own aromatic signature evolved throughout his working day as he moved from patient to patient, accumulating scent traces from each encounter. By evening, his clothing and person carried a complex mixture of human aromas that told the story of his daily activities. His hands, despite regular washing, retained traces of the various medicines and bodily fluids he had handled, creating a distinctive professional scent that marked him as a medical practitioner. Dr. Blackthorn's home life reflected the same principles of cleanliness and hygiene that governed his professional practice. He lived with his wife and 3 children in a substantial house near his consulting rooms, and the household maintained standards of cleanliness that were considered exemplary for their social class. The family employed 2 servants who were responsible for maintaining the house and preparing meals, yet even this relatively privileged household operated under the same basic assumptions about hygiene that characterized all of 18th century society. The doctor's wife, Mrs. Blackthorn, maintained her own complex relationship with personal cleanliness and scent. As the wife of a successful physician, she had access to expensive cosmetic preparations and professional beauty treatments, yet these enhancements were layered over rather than substituted for her natural human aromas. Her weekly routine included the use of various powders, pomades, and perfumes that complemented her natural scent rather than masking it. The Blackthorn children, like children throughout London, carried the distinctive aromas of childhood in an era when frequent bathing was considered dangerous. Their bodies developed natural scent profiles that their parents considered signs of health and vitality, and their weekly washing routines were designed to maintain rather than eliminate these fundamental human aromas. The family servants, while better washed than most working-class Londoners, still carried the distinctive scents of their occupations. The cook's hands permanently smelled of the food she prepared, while the housemaid's clothing absorbed the various cleaning materials and environmental odors she encountered in her daily work. Yet these occupational aromas were considered normal and even desirable as they indicated honest labor and professional competence. Dr. Blackthorn's evening routine included time spent in his private study where he maintained his medical library and prepared medicines for the following day's patients. The study itself was an aromatic environment that reflected his professional interests, shelves lined with books whose leather bindings had absorbed years of smoke, and human handling bottles containing various medicinal preparations that filled the air with complex chemical scents and the general mustiness of a room that was rarely aired due to concerns about harmful night vapors. The process of preparing medicines was itself an aromatic activity that contributed to Dr. Blackthorn's professional scent profile. He ground various herbs and minerals using a mortar and pestle, creating powders and mixtures that would be dispensed to patients the following day. These preparations filled the study with clouds of aromatic dust that settled on every surface and were absorbed into Dr. Blackthorn's clothing and hair. The medicines themselves reflected the medical understanding of the era, incorporating substances that were believed to restore humoral balance rather than address specific disease mechanisms. Mercury preparations, popular for treating syphilis and other conditions, filled the study with their distinctive metallic scent. Opium-based pain relievers contributed their own sweet, cloying aroma, while various herbal preparations added notes of mint, sage, and other botanicals to the room's complex olfactory environment. Dr. Blackthorn's professional reputation depended not only on his medical knowledge, but also on his ability to maintain the appropriate aromatic signature for a physician of his standing. Patients expected their doctor to smell of medicine and learning, and Dr. Blackthorn's scent profile fulfilled these expectations perfectly. His combination of professional aromas, expensive personal preparations, and fundamental human scents created an olfactory identity that inspired confidence in his medical abilities. The broader medical community of London in 1743 shared similar approaches to personal hygiene and professional identity. Physicians, surgeons, and apothecaries all maintained aromatic signatures that reflected their particular specialties and social positions. The Royal College of Physicians, where Dr. Blackthorne had received his training, was itself an aromatic environment where the sense of learning and medicine combined with the fundamental human aromas of its members and students. Medical education of the period emphasized the importance of developing one's sense of smell as a diagnostic tool, and students spent considerable time learning to identify the various odors associated with different diseases and conditions. This training created a medical professional class that was extraordinarily sensitive to aromatic nuances, yet this sensitivity was applied within the context of an era when intense human scents were considered normal and healthy. The great market at Covent Garden awakened each morning to a symphony of aromas that would challenge even the most experienced nose of 1743 London. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the smoke-laden air, the market vendors began arranging their wares in displays that were as much about aromatic appeal as visual presentation. This was the heart of London's food distribution system, where the products of rural England met the appetites of the urban masses, creating an olfactory environment of extraordinary complexity and intensity. Martha Goodwin had been selling vegetables at Covent Garden for over 20 years, and her pitch near the central piazza was a coveted location that she had inherited from her mother. Martha's own aromatic signature reflected her occupation in ways that went far beyond simple exposure to vegetables. Her hands permanently stained green from handling cabbages and other leafy vegetables carried the distinctive scent of plant matter in various stages of freshness and decay. The vegetables Martha sold were transported to London from farms throughout the surrounding countryside, a journey that typically took several days by cart over rutted roads. By the time they reached her stall, even the freshest vegetables carried the aromatic evidence of their journey, the hay and horse sweat from the carts that brought them the dust of country roads, and the gradual changes that occurred as plant matter began its inevitable process of decomposition. Martha's sales technique relied heavily on customers' ability to assess the quality of her vegetables through smell, and she had developed sophisticated methods for managing the aromatic presentation of her wares. Vegetables that were beginning to show signs of age were arranged to take advantage of the morning breezes, which carried away their more pronounced aromas before customers arrived. Fresher items were positioned where their appealing scents would attract attention and encourage purchases. The customers who visited Martha's stall each morning represented a cross-section of London society, each carrying their own distinctive aromatic signatures that mixed with the market's complex olfactory environment. Mrs. Blackwood, the fishmonger's wife, arrived early each morning to select vegetables for her family's meals, bringing with her the permanent fish and brine scent that marked her occupation. Her practiced nose could distinguish between vegetables that would last several days and those that needed immediate consumption. Young Tommy Fletcher, who worked for a wealthy merchant's household, made his rounds through the market with a careful shopping list and strict instructions about quality and price. Tommy's own scent reflected his position as a servant in a prosperous house. His clothes were cleaner than those of street vendors, but he still carried the distinctive aromatic markers of his social class and occupation. The process of selling vegetables in 18th century London involved complex negotiations that were conducted as much through scent as through sight and sound. Customers expected to smell vegetables before purchasing them, and vendors like Martha had developed techniques for presenting their wares' aromatic qualities in the most favorable light. Cabbages that were beginning to develop strong odors were mixed with fresher examples, while root vegetables that retained pleasant earthy scents were positioned prominently. The market's aromatic environment was constantly changing throughout the day as the interplay between fresh arrivals, aging produce, and human activity created new combinations of scents. The morning brought the relatively fresh aromas of newly arrived vegetables, but as the day progressed and the sun warmed the market stalls, the intensity of all odors increased dramatically. Fish vendors like Old Sam Hartwell occupied a section of the market that was both central to London's food supply and challenging to the senses of those unaccustomed to the realities of pre-refrigeration food preservation. Sam had been selling fish at Covent Garden for 30 years, and his stall was a testament to the complex relationship between freshness preservation and customer expectations in 18th century London. The fish Sam sold had been caught in the Thames estuary or brought from coastal fishing villages by cart, a journey that took several days under the best circumstances. During summer months, the challenge of keeping fish from spoiling during transport was particularly acute, and Sam had developed expertise in assessing and presenting fish that were in various stages of freshness. Sam's own aromatic signature was so distinctive that regular customers could identify his approach from several streets away. His clothes, which were rarely washed, due to the futility of trying to remove fish odors, had absorbed years of exposure to fish scales, brine, and the various stages of seafood decomposition. His hands, permanently stained and scented from handling fish, were themselves aromatic repositories of his professional expertise. The techniques Sam used to present his fish reflected both the realities of pre-refrigeration preservation and the sophisticated understanding that 18th century consumers had developed about food quality. Fish that were beginning to show signs of age were arranged to minimize their aromatic impact, while fresher examples were positioned to take advantage of breezes that would carry their more appealing scents toward potential customers. Sam's customers had developed equally sophisticated abilities to assess fish quality through smell, and the process of purchasing fish involved complex, aromatic negotiations between vendor and buyer. Mrs. Hambleton. The wool merchant's wife could distinguish by scent alone between fish that would be suitable for immediate consumption and those that required quick cooking to remain palatable. The interaction between Sam and his customers revealed the sophisticated understanding of food preservation and safety that had developed in an era without refrigeration. Customers expected fish to have strong odors, but they had learned to distinguish between the normal aromas of aged fish and the warning scents that indicated dangerous spoilage. This knowledge was passed down through generations and represented a form of olfactory expertise that modern consumers have largely lost. The meat vendors who occupied another section of Covent Garden faced similar challenges in presenting their products under conditions that modern health authorities would consider dangerous. William Carpenter, who had inherited his father's butcher stall, dealt daily with the realities of selling meat that had been transported from slaughterhouses throughout London without any form of refrigeration. William's aromatic signature reflected not only his daily exposure to raw meat, but also the complex processes involved in preparing meat for sale in 18th century London. His clothes carried the distinctive sense of blood animal fat and the various stages of meat aging that were considered normal parts of the butchering trade. His hands, despite regular washing, retained the deep-seated odors of his profession that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. The meat William sold was presented in ways that maximized its aromatic appeal while minimizing customer concerns about freshness. Fresh cuts were arranged to catch morning breezes that would carry their scents toward potential buyers, while older meat was often seasoned with herbs and spices that both enhanced flavor and modified aromatic presentation. Williams' customers brought their own expertise to the process of meat selection, having developed sophisticated abilities to assess meat quality through smell. The process of purchasing meat involved detailed aromatic inspection, with customers often requesting to smell specific cuts before making their purchasing decisions. The spice merchants who served Covent Garden's more affluent customers occupied stalls that provided aromatic relief from the intense animal and vegetable odors that dominated the market. These vendors sold expensive imported spices that were used both for cooking and for masking the strong flavors of aged meat and vegetables that characterized much 18th century cuisine. James Whitmore's spice stall was an aromatic oasis that attracted customers seeking both culinary ingredients and the pleasant sensory experience of exotic fragrances. James himself carried the complex scent signature of his trade cinnamon, nutmeg, pepper, and dozens of other spices that had penetrated his clothing and skin through years of handling aromatic merchandise. The spices James sold were imported from distant parts of the world through trading networks that brought exotic aromas to London's markets. These spices were expensive and were often purchased in small quantities by customers who understood their value both as flavoring agents and as aromatic enhancers for food that might otherwise be unpalatable. The customers who visited James's stall were typically from the merchant class or aristocracy, people who could afford expensive imported spices and who understood their culinary applications. These customers brought their own complex, aromatic signatures to the spice stall. Expensive perfumes, fine fabrics, and the distinctive sense of privileged urban life. The bread vendors who served the market's daily customers occupied stalls that provided the comforting aromas of baked goods to the complex olfactory environment of Covent Garden. These vendors sold bread that had been baked in commercial ovens throughout London, transported to the market while still warm and displayed in ways that maximized the appeal of fresh-baked aromas. Mary Patterson's bread stall was a gathering place for customers seeking the fundamental staple of 18th century diet, and her own aromatic signature reflected both her occupation and her social position. Her clothes carried the distinctive sense of flour yeast and wood smoke from the ovens where her bread was baked, creating an aromatic identity that customers found both familiar and appealing. The bread Mary sold was transported from bakeries throughout London, each with its own distinctive aromatic signature, based on the type of flour used, the fuel burned in the ovens, and the particular techniques employed by different bakers. Customers could often identify the source of bread by its scent alone, and many had strong preferences for bread from particular bakeries. Mary's customers represented all social classes of London society, as bread was a universal necessity that crossed economic boundaries. The aromatic signatures of her customers reflected the full spectrum of 18th century urban life, from the intense working-class sense of laborers and craftsmen to the more refined but equally distinctive aromas of merchant families and minor aristocrats. The daily rhythm of Covent Garden created a constantly changing aromatic environment that reflected the ebb and flow of urban commercial life. Morning brought the relatively fresh sense of newly arrived merchandise, but as the day progressed and the sun warmed the market stalls, the intensity of all odors increased dramatically. By midday, the market's aromatic environment had reached levels that would be overwhelming to modern sensibilities. The combination of aging vegetables, fish in various stages of freshness, raw meat, human perspiration, and the accumulated scents of hundreds of people created an olfactory experience of extraordinary complexity and intensity. Yet the people who worked and shopped at Covent Garden were completely adapted to this aromatic environment. Their noses had developed the ability to filter useful information from the complex mixture of scents, allowing them to assess food quality, identify familiar vendors and customers, and navigate the social and commercial relationships that defined market life. The evening brought its own aromatic changes to Covent Garden as vendors cleaned their stalls and prepared for the following day's business. The process of cleaning involved removing spoiled merchandise, washing surfaces with cold water, and arranging remaining stock in ways that would minimize aromatic deterioration overnight. The aromatic legacy of each day's market activity was absorbed into the permanent structures of Covent Garden, the wooden stalls, the stone pavement, and the buildings that surrounded the market area. These surfaces served as repositories of olfactory memory, holding the accumulated sense of decades of commercial activity that created the distinctive aromatic identity of London's premier market. As the long day of 1743 drew to a close across London, families throughout the city began their evening routines that would prepare them for sleep and renewal. These rituals, like all aspects of 18th century life, were conducted within an aromatic environment that modern people would find overwhelming, yet they represented the pinnacle of comfort and cleanliness for people of their era. In her modest chambers above the bakery, Margaret Whitworth began the process of preparing for bed with the same methodical care she brought to all aspects of her daily routine. The evening's activities would transform her from the day clothes-wearing baker's wife into the night clothes-wearing woman who would share her bed with her husband Thomas, and this transformation involved its own complex, aromatic negotiations. Margaret's evening routine began with the careful removal of her outer clothing, each garment carrying the accumulated scents of the day's activities. Her gown, which had absorbed the flour dust, wood smoke, and human aromas of the bakery, was carefully folded and set aside to be worn again the following day. The gown's fabric held the story of her daily activities in its aromatic signature: the yeast and sourdough from the bread-making process, the smoke from the wood-fired oven, and the various human scents of customers who had visited the bakery. The removal of her stays required Thomas's assistance, as the lacing system was designed to be adjusted by another person. The stays themselves, having been worn continuously for weeks, had molded to Margaret's body shape, while absorbing the complex mixture of perspiration, fabric softeners, and environmental odors that characterized her daily life. The process of removing the stays revealed the extent to which they had become integrated into Margaret's aromatic identity. Margaret shifted the linen undergarment that had served as a barrier between her body and her outer clothing, showed the week's accumulation of body oils and perspiration that it had absorbed. The shift's fabric, while changed more frequently than her outer garment, still carried several days' worth of Margaret's natural human scent. This scent was neither pleasant nor unpleasant by the standards of her time. It was simply the normal human aroma that everyone carried and accepted. The process of changing into her nightgown involved the brief nakedness that was the closest Margaret came to experiencing her own unmediated human scent. In the cool air of the bedchamber, her body's natural aromas became temporarily more noticeable, providing a baseline against which all other scents were measured. This momentary aromatic awareness was quickly covered by her nightgown, a garment of soft linen that had been worn for several nights and carried its own accumulated scents. Margaret's nightgown was one of her most personal possessions, a garment that existed solely for the private world of sleep and marital intimacy. The fabric had absorbed the scents of many nights, her own natural human aromas, the oils and pomades she occasionally applied before bed, and the shared scents of the marriage bed she occupied with Thomas. The marriage bed itself was a complex aromatic environment that reflected the intimate aspects of 18th century life that are often overlooked in historical accounts. The bed linens changed perhaps monthly, if the family was prosperous, had absorbed weeks of accumulated human scents from both Margaret and Thomas. The straw mattress beneath the linens had been in use for years and carried the deep-seated aromas of prolonged human occupation. The wool blankets that provided warmth during cold nights had their own distinctive scent profile, combining the natural lanolin of sheep's wool with the accumulated human odors they had absorbed over months of use. These blankets were rarely washed, as the process was difficult and time-consuming, and they gradually developed the complex aromatic signature that marked them as belonging to a particular household. Thomas's own evening routine paralleled Margaret's in its basic structure, but reflected the different expectations society had for men regarding personal cleanliness and scent. His clothing removal revealed the intense aromatic signature of a man who had spent his day working over a wood-fired oven, handling yeast and flour, and interacting with customers in the close quarters of the bakery. Thomas's work clothes told the story of his daily labor in their aromatic complexity. His leather apron, worn to protect his other clothing from flour and ash, had absorbed months of exposure to the bakery environment. The leather itself had developed a distinctive scent that combined the natural oils used in its preparation with the accumulated substances of daily bread-making flour, dust, wood, ash, yeast cultures, and the heat-generated aromas of baking bread. His woolen shirt, worn for the entire week, carried the deep-seated sense of masculine labor that were considered normal and even attractive in 18th century society. The shirt's fabric had absorbed not only Thomas's natural body odors, but also the environmental scents of his workplace, the smoke from the wood-fired oven, the earthy smell of flour storage areas, and the distinctive aroma of sourdough starter that permeated every surface of the bakery. Thomas's evening washing routine was brief and practical, involving the washing of his hands and face with cold water from the same basin that Margaret had used earlier. His hands, permanently marked by his trade, carried scents that no amount of washing could completely remove: the sourdough starter that lived under his fingernails, the wood ash used to clean baking surfaces, and the distinctive metallic smell of the iron tools he used in his daily work. The shared intimacy of the marriage bed represented the most private aspect of 18th century aromatic life, where the natural human sense of husband and wife mingled without the mediation of social expectations or public appearances. Margaret and Thomas's shared sleeping space was an aromatic sanctuary where their individual scent signatures combined to create the distinctive olfactory identity of their marriage. The bed they shared had been their marriage bed for over 15 years, and its aromatic character reflected the accumulated intimacy of their relationship. The straw mattress had absorbed years of shared human presence, creating a scent profile that was unique to their household. The linen sheets, changed monthly when resources permitted, carried the complex mixture of their combined human aromas, along with the various oils and pomades they occasionally used. The process of falling asleep involved a gradual release from the social constraints that governed daytime aromatic behavior. In the privacy of their bed, Margaret and Thomas could experience their own and each other's natural human scents without the need to modify or enhance them for public consumption. This olfactory intimacy was an important but rarely discussed aspect of 18th century marriage that created bonds of familiarity and acceptance that went beyond conscious awareness. Meanwhile, in the grand chambers of Pemberton Hall, Lady Constance was engaging in her own elaborate evening ritual that reflected the complex relationship between aristocratic privilege and personal hygiene. Her evening routine was far more elaborate than Margaret's, involving multiple servants and expensive preparations, yet it operated under the same fundamental assumptions about cleanliness and scent that governed all 18th century life. Lady Pemberton's evening toilet began with the careful removal of her elaborate day dress, a process that required the assistance of her lady's maid and involved the dismantling of complex arrangements of fabric stays and accessories. The dress itself, made from expensive silk and decorated with costly lace, had absorbed a full day's worth of aristocratic life, the scents of perfumed drawing rooms, the aromatic traces of other fashionable people, and Lady Pemberton's own complex mixture of natural and applied fragrances. The removal of Lady Pemberton's stays revealed the extent to which these garments had become integrated into her physical and aromatic identity. The stays, worn continuously for weeks, had not only shaped her silhouette, but had also absorbed the accumulated scents of her daily activities. The whalebone and canvas construction held these aromas in a concentrated form that was released when the garment was finally removed. Lady Pemberton's evening washing routine was more elaborate than that of lower-class women, but was still conducted according to the medical theories of her time, which warned against the dangers of frequent contact with water. Instead of washing with water, her maid used soft cloths dampened with rose water to remove any visible soil from her skin while preserving the natural oils that were considered essential for health and beauty. The application of evening preparations represented the pinnacle of aristocratic beauty practices involving expensive imported cosmetics and perfumes that were designed to enhance rather than replace Lady Pemberton's natural aromatic signature. Her maid applied various pomades and oils to her skin, creating a complex layering of scents that would permeate her nightclothes and bedding. Lady Pemberton's hair care routine was particularly elaborate, involving the careful maintenance of the elaborate hairstyle that had been constructed weeks earlier by a professional hairdresser. The hair was lightly dusted with fresh powder and treated with aromatic oils that would preserve its structure while adding pleasant fragrances that would linger throughout the night. The aristocratic bedchamber itself was an aromatic environment that reflected both luxury and the limitations of 18th century hygiene practices. The silk bed hangings, while expensive and beautiful, had not been washed in over a year and had absorbed the accumulated scents of many nights' use. The mattress, stuffed with expensive down rather than straw, still carried the fundamental human aromas that characterized all sleeping spaces of the period. Lady Pemberton's nightgown was made from the finest linen available, yet it was still worn for several nights before being changed. The garment absorbed her complex, aromatic signature, expensive perfumes, natural human scents, and the various preparations applied to her skin and hair, creating a personal olfactory environment that was unique to her social position and individual preferences. The contrast between Lady Pemberton's elaborate evening routine and Margaret Whitworth's simple preparations highlighted the ways in which social class influenced aromatic practices while leaving fundamental assumptions about cleanliness unchanged. Both women concluded their days by creating personal aromatic environments that reflected their social positions and individual circumstances, yet both operated within the same basic framework of 18th century hygiene theory. In the cramped quarters of London's working-class neighborhoods, families like the Hartwells conducted their evening routines under different constraints, but with similar goals. The limitation of space meant that privacy was minimal and aromatic environments were shared among multiple family members in ways that created complex negotiations of scent and personal space. William Hartwell's return from his day's work at the merchant's office brought the aromatic traces of commercial London into the family's living space. His clothes carried the scents of the counting house where he worked ink parchment, the various commodities that passed through the merchant's hands, and the accumulated human aromas of his colleagues and customers. The Hartwell family's evening meal was prepared and consumed in an atmosphere thick with cooking smells that mixed with the accumulated human aromas of the day's activities. The kitchen fire used for both cooking and heating filled the house with smoke that penetrated every fabric and surface, creating an environmental aroma that was both comforting and overwhelming. Elizabeth Hartwell's evening routine involved the management of her family's collective aromatic environment, as well as her own personal preparations for sleep. She supervised the children's evening washing, which consisted of cleaning hands and faces with cold water, and she ensured that their sleeping clothes were arranged to provide maximum comfort within the family's limited space. The children's bedtime routine revealed the particular challenges of maintaining personal hygiene in crowded urban conditions. James and Mary shared a small bed in the family's single sleeping room, and their individual aromatic signatures combined with those of their parents to create a complex olfactory environment that was both intimate and sometimes overwhelming. The shared sleeping arrangements common among working-class families created unique aromatic dynamics that differed significantly from the private bedchambers of the wealthy. Multiple family members sleeping in close proximity meant that individual scent signatures became blended into collective family aromas that were both comforting in their familiarity and challenging in their intensity. Dr. Blackthorne's evening routine reflected his professional status and medical theories about proper nighttime hygiene. His evening preparations included the burning of aromatic herbs that were believed to purify the air and prevent the harmful night vapors that medical theory associated with disease transmission. The doctor's bedchamber was treated with various aromatic preparations that were supposed to promote healthy sleep and prevent illness. Lavender and other herbs were scattered among the bed linens, and aromatic candles made from expensive wax provided both light and pleasant fragrances that were believed to have medicinal properties. Dr. Blackthorne's evening reading routine took place in his study, surrounded by the complex aromatic environment of his medical books, prepared medicines, and professional equipment. The leather bindings of his books had absorbed years of smoke, human handling, and environmental odors, creating an olfactory atmosphere that he associated with learning and professional competence. Throughout London, the evening routines of people from all social classes created a gradual transformation of the city's aromatic environment as the activities of the day gave way to the different scents of evening and night. Cooking fires sent clouds of aromatic smoke through neighborhoods. Families gathered in close quarters for meals and conversation, and the city gradually settled into the more intimate olfactory atmosphere of domestic life. The transition from day to night involved not only changes in activity, but also changes in aromatic awareness as people moved from public to private spaces. The social constraints that governed daytime aromatic behavior relaxed in the privacy of homes and families, allowing for more natural expression of human scents and more intimate sharing of personal aromatic spaces. The city's taverns and alehouses experienced their own evening aromatic transformations as workers gathered to drink and socialize after their day's labor. These establishments were aromatic melting pots, where the scents of different trades and social classes mixed with the distinctive aromas of ale, tobacco smoke, and human socialization. The evening activities of London's more prosperous residents included social gatherings in private homes, where the aromatic signatures of fashionable society created complex olfactory environments. These gatherings brought together people wearing expensive perfumes and cosmetics, yet underneath these luxury additions lay the same fundamental human aromas that characterized all social interaction in the 18th century. As night fell across London, the city's aromatic environment underwent its daily transformation from the intense, complex scents of urban commerce to the more intimate domestic aromas of family life and social gathering. This transition was gradual and subtle, but it represented a fundamental shift in the olfactory character of urban life that reflected the rhythms of human activity and social organization. The darkness brought its own aromatic changes as the visual dominance that characterized daytime activity gave way to the heightened importance of other senses, including smell. People navigated the dark streets of London as much by their aromatic familiarity with different neighborhoods and buildings as by their limited visual cues. Night watchmen who patrolled London's streets developed extraordinary abilities to identify potential problems through their sense of smell alone. They could detect fires by the distinctive scent of burning wood or fabric, identify the presence of strangers in familiar neighborhoods by their unfamiliar aromatic signatures, and locate taverns and other establishments by their characteristic odors. The aromatic environment of nighttime London was both more intimate and more dangerous than its daytime counterpart. The concentration of people in smaller enclosed spaces intensified all human sense, while the darkness made it difficult to identify the sources of unfamiliar or potentially threatening aromas. The arrival of winter in London brought with it a dramatic transformation of the city's aromatic landscape that affected every aspect of daily life. The year 1743 had been particularly harsh with early frosts and extended periods of cold that drove people indoors and concentrated human sense in ways that created entirely new olfactory challenges and experiences. In Margaret Whitworth's bakery, the cold months brought both opportunities and difficulties that were reflected in the establishment's evolving aromatic character. The need for increased heating meant that the wood-fired oven burned more continuously, filling the bakery with dense smoke that penetrated every surface and created an intensely aromatic environment that customers either found comforting or overwhelming. The winter's cold also meant that the bakery's doors and windows remained closed for weeks at a time, preventing the natural ventilation that had provided some relief from the accumulated sense of daily bread making. The result was an intensification of all aromatic elements, the yeast and sourdough cultures, the wood smoke, the flour dust, and the human sense of the Whitworth family and their customers. Margaret's winter clothing routine reflected the seasonal challenges of maintaining personal warmth and cleanliness during the cold months. Her heavy woolen cloak, worn continuously from October through March, became a repository of winter's accumulated scents, wood smoke from countless fires, the distinctive aroma of wet wool, and the concentrated human odors that resulted from rarely removing outer garments. The process of heating water for washing became increasingly difficult and expensive during winter, leading to even less frequent bathing than was typical during warmer months. Margaret's weekly face and hand washing continued, but the full-body washing that occurred monthly during summer was often postponed for weeks during the coldest winter months. The bakery's customers during winter months carried their own seasonal aromatic signatures that reflected the challenges of cold weather life in 18th century London. Heavy woolen clothing worn continuously for months created concentrated human scents that were intensified by the need to remain bundled up in multiple layers. The smoke from heating fires clung to everyone's clothing, creating a shared aromatic experience that marked the winter season. Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife, presented an extreme example of winter's aromatic intensification. Her husband's forge burned continuously during cold months, filling their home and shop with dense smoke that penetrated every fabric and surface. Mrs. Henderson's clothing had absorbed months of this smoke combined with her own and her family's concentrated human scents, creating an aromatic signature so intense that it could be detected from considerable distances. The challenges of food preservation during winter months created their own distinctive aromatic environments. Root vegetables stored in cool cellars developed earthy, musty scents that intensified over the winter months. Preserved meats, salted and smoked for long-term storage, filled homes with the complex aromas of preservation that mixed salt smoke and gradually changing meat scents. Lady Pemberton's winter routine at Pemberton Hall reflected the aristocratic response to cold weather aromatic challenges. The great house's massive fireplaces burned continuously, consuming enormous quantities of wood and filling the rooms with smoke that mixed with the concentrated scents of inhabitants who rarely ventured outdoors during the coldest months. The heating of such a large house created complex air currents that distributed and concentrated different scents in unexpected ways. Lady Pemberton's personal apartments might be filled with the expensive perfumes and cosmetics of aristocratic life, while the servants' quarters accumulated the more intense working-class aromas that characterized their daily lives. Lady Pemberton's winter wardrobe consisted of heavy fabrics and multiple layers that created aromatic microenvironments around her body. Her fur-lined cloak, worn during brief excursions outside, had absorbed the scents of the various animals from which it was made, combined with the perfumes and powders she habitually used. The aristocratic practice of spending entire days indoors during winter created unique aromatic challenges that required careful management. The accumulation of human scents in enclosed spaces was addressed through the burning of aromatic woods and herbs, but these measures only added additional layers to the already complex olfactory environment. In London's working-class neighborhoods, winter brought aromatic intensification that reached levels that would be difficult for modern people to imagine. Entire families crowded into single rooms that were heated by small fires, creating concentrations of human scent that were both intimate and overwhelming. The Hartwell family's winter routine involved the management of their small living space to accommodate the aromatic realities of cold weather life. Windows remained closed for months, while the single fireplace provided both heat and cooking facility, filling their rooms with smoke that mixed with the concentrated scents of 4 people living in close proximity. William Hartwell's winter work routine at the merchant's office involved daily transitions between the concentrated aromatic environment of his home and the different but equally intense scents of the commercial building where he worked. The office building, heated by multiple fireplaces and occupied by dozens of workers, created its own distinctive winter aromatic signature. The children's experience of winter aromas was particularly intense as their smaller bodies were more sensitive to scent concentration, while their daily activities were increasingly confined to small indoor spaces. James and Mary Hartwell learned to navigate their world as much through aromatic cues as visual ones, developing sophisticated abilities to identify familiar and unfamiliar people, places, and situations through their sense of smell. Dr. Blackthorne's medical practice during winter months brought him into contact with patients whose health problems were often exacerbated by the aromatic intensity of cold weather living. The physician had observed connections between overcrowded, poorly ventilated living conditions and various health problems, though his understanding of these relationships was filtered through 18th century medical theory. The doctor's winter house calls required him to enter homes where the accumulation of human scents, cooking odors, and smoke had reached levels that challenged even his professionally trained nose. He had learned to identify certain health conditions through the distinctive odors that accompanied them, and winter's aromatic intensification made these diagnostic scents more apparent. Dr. Blackthorn's own home during winter became an aromatic laboratory where he experimented with various herbs and preparations designed to purify the air and prevent disease. His study filled with the sense of burning medicinal herbs, while his preparation of winter medicines created additional aromatic complexity. The seasonal shift from winter to spring brought dramatic changes to London's aromatic environment that were welcomed by residents who had endured months of concentrated indoor scents. The gradual warming of the air allowed for the opening of windows and doors that had remained closed throughout the cold months, creating the first natural ventilation many buildings had experienced since autumn. Margaret Whitworth's bakery experienced this seasonal transformation as a gradual replacement of intense, concentrated winter aromas with the fresher, more varied scents of spring. The ability to open doors and windows allowed the accumulated smoke flower dust and human scents to dissipate, while the warmer weather brought new aromatic possibilities. The spring cleaning rituals that marked the end of winter were aromatic events that transformed household environments throughout London. Fabrics that had absorbed months of concentrated indoor scents were aired outdoors, where sun and wind worked to refresh their aromatic character. Lady Pemberton's spring cleaning at Pemberton Hall was an elaborate undertaking that involved teams of servants working to refresh the aromatic environment of the great house. Tapestries, bed hangings, and other fabrics were taken outdoors to air, while rooms were swept and scrubbed to remove the accumulated residues of winter's intensive indoor living. The aristocratic practice of spring travel to country estates was motivated partly by the desire to escape the concentrated urban aromas that had built up during winter months. The countryside offered aromatic relief through its cleaner air and natural scents that provided respite from months of intensive human proximity. Spring's arrival also brought changes to London's food supply that were reflected in the city's aromatic environment. Fresh vegetables appeared in markets for the first time in months, while preserved foods that had sustained the population through winter were gradually replaced by items that carried the cleaner, more varied sense of the growing season. The seasonal rhythm of aromatic intensity and relief was one of the fundamental patterns that structured 18th century life. People had learned to anticipate and adapt to these changes, developing coping strategies for winter's aromatic challenges and appreciating spring's olfactory renewal. Summer brought its own distinctive aromatic character to London as warm weather intensified all scents while creating new challenges for food preservation and personal hygiene. The heat accelerated the decomposition of organic matter, intensifying the aromas of market streets and human bodies. Margaret Whitworth's summer routine involved early morning work in the bakery to avoid the day's heat, which would intensify all aromatic elements beyond comfortable levels. The warm weather made the bakery's already complex olfactory environment nearly overwhelming during midday hours. Summer's heat affected human scent production in ways that required adjustments to daily routines and social expectations. Increased perspiration intensified personal aromas, while the warm weather made heavy clothing uncomfortable, leading to more frequent changes of outer garments if resources permitted. The summer aromatic environment of London was both more intense and more varied than winter's concentrated indoor scents. Open windows and doors allowed for better ventilation, but they also permitted the free circulation of the intensified aromas that warm weather produced throughout the city. Autumn brought the gradual return to enclosed living that would culminate in winter's aromatic intensity. The harvest season filled London's markets with the distinctive scents of newly gathered foods, while the cooling weather began the process of driving people indoors that would shape the aromatic environment for the months ahead. The seasonal cycle of aromatic intensity and relief was such a fundamental part of 18th century life that people planned their activities around these predictable changes. The rhythm of concentration and dispersal, intensity and relief shaped everything from personal hygiene routines to social activities to medical treatments. Understanding these seasonal patterns helps explain why 18th century people developed such sophisticated tolerance for aromatic intensity. They lived within natural cycles of scent concentration that required adaptability and acceptance, creating communities of people who shared common olfactory experiences and developed collective strategies for managing their aromatic environment. The complexity of 18th century society was nowhere more apparent than in the elaborate hierarchies of scent that marked social position, occupation, and respectability. In the London of 1743, a person's aromatic signature served as an immediate identifier of their place in the social order, creating a sophisticated system of olfactory communication that operated largely below the level of conscious awareness. At the pinnacle of this aromatic hierarchy stood members of the aristocracy, like Lady Pemberton, whose scent profile represented the ultimate expression of expensive taste and social privilege. Lady Pemberton's daily aromatic signature was a carefully constructed masterpiece that required considerable time, money, and expertise to achieve and maintain. The foundation of Lady Pemberton's scent profile was her access to expensive imported perfumes that were available only to the wealthiest members of society. These perfumes, made from rare flowers, exotic spices, and costly animal-derived scents like ambergris and musk, were applied in careful layers that created a complex, aromatic composition designed to project over considerable distances. Lady Pemberton's perfumes were not simple fragrances, but sophisticated olfactory statements that announced her social position to everyone within scent range. The rose water she used came from Bulgaria, the orange blossom essence from France, and the precious ambergris from Wales hunted in distant oceans. Each component of her aromatic signature represented a small fortune in imported luxury goods. The application of these expensive fragrances required considerable skill and knowledge that was passed down through generations of aristocratic women and their personal servants. Lady Pemberton's maid had been trained in the complex art of layering different scents to create harmonious compositions that would maintain their appeal throughout long social events. The aristocratic understanding of perfume was fundamentally different from modern concepts of fragrance. Rather than masking natural human scents, 18th century perfumes were designed to complement and enhance the wearer's natural aromatic signature. Lady Pemberton's expensive fragrances were meant to create a sophisticated interplay with her own human scents, not to replace them. Lady Pemberton's clothing also played a crucial role in her aromatic hierarchy. Her gowns, made from expensive silk and decorated with costly lace, were themselves repositories of aristocratic scent. The silk had been imported from China at great expense, and its smooth surface held and released fragrances in ways that enhanced their projection and longevity. The process of maintaining aristocratic clothing created its own aromatic complexities. Lady Pemberton's gowns were rarely washed in the modern sense, but they were regularly treated with aromatic powders and herbs that were designed to preserve their appearance and manage their scent. These treatments used expensive ingredients like orris root ground pearls and rare spices that added to the overall cost and complexity of aristocratic dress. Lady Pemberton's hair care represented another layer of aromatic hierarchy that distinguished her from lower social classes. Her elaborate hairstyles required the services of professional hairdressers who used expensive pomades and powders that were beyond the reach of ordinary people. The construction of aristocratic hairstyles created aromatic architectures that could be maintained for weeks with careful daily attention. The powders used in Lady Pemberton's hair were themselves markers of social status. The finest powders were made from rice flour, mixed with ground orris root, and scented with expensive floral essences. These powders were applied in such quantities that they created clouds of aromatic dust that filled rooms and settled on furniture, marking spaces as aristocratic through their distinctive scent signatures. Below the aristocracy and the social hierarchy stood the merchant class, represented by families like the Hartwells, whose aromatic signatures reflected their improving social status while acknowledging the limitations of their resources. William Hartwell's scent profile was carefully managed to project respectability and success while avoiding the ostentation that might be considered inappropriate for his social position. William's access to aromatic luxury was limited but significant. He could afford modest amounts of imported spices for his family's use, and his wife Elizabeth had access to middle-grade cosmetic preparations that marked their family as prosperous without claiming aristocratic privilege. The Hartwell family's aromatic signature was a careful balance between aspiration and appropriateness. The merchant class's approach to scent management involved complex negotiations between the desire to project success and the need to maintain social appropriateness. William's work clothes were of good quality and were maintained with aromatic preparations that suggested prosperity without claiming aristocratic status. His use of pomades and powders was conservative but consistent, creating an aromatic signature that suggested reliability and success. Elizabeth Hartwell's aromatic choices reflected the particular challenges faced by women of the merchant class who needed to project feminine appeal and household management skills while avoiding any suggestion of impropriety. Her use of floral waters and herb-scented powders was carefully calculated to enhance her natural femininity without suggesting the kind of elaborate artifice associated with aristocratic or theatrical women. The children of merchant families like James and Mary Hartwell occupied a unique position in the aromatic hierarchy. They were expected to smell like healthy, well-cared-for children, but they were also being prepared for adult roles that would require more sophisticated scent management. Their aromatic education involved learning to appreciate and eventually use the kinds of preparations that would mark them as respectable adults. The working classes, represented by people like Margaret Whitworth and the various tradespeople who frequented her bakery, operated within aromatic hierarchies that were based more on occupation and respectability than on access to expensive luxury goods. Margaret's scent profile was shaped primarily by her work in the bakery, but it also reflected her efforts to maintain personal respectability within her social circumstances. Margaret's aromatic signature was dominated by the occupational sense of bread-making flour, yeast, wood smoke, and the various other substances involved in her daily work. These scents were not considered unpleasant or inappropriate. Indeed, they marked her as a skilled and productive member of her community. The smell of fresh bread was universally appreciated and associated with comfort and sustenance. Margaret's personal care routine involved the use of modest amounts of aromatic preparations that enhanced rather than masked her occupational scents. She used herb-scented soaps when she could afford them, and she occasionally applied small amounts of floral waters that complemented the yeasty, flower-scented base of her daily aromatic signature. The customers who visited Margaret's bakery represented various levels of the working class aromatic hierarchy. Skilled craftsmen like the carpenter or blacksmith carried the distinctive scents of their trades, wood shavings, and metal respectively, that marked them as accomplished practitioners of valuable skills. These occupational scents were sources of pride rather than embarrassment as they demonstrated the bearer's usefulness and competence. Unskilled laborers carried more intense versions of basic human scents, intensified by harder physical work and less access to cleaning materials and aromatic preparations. Yet even these more intense scents operated within accepted social parameters, as everyone understood the relationship between hard work, limited resources, and aromatic intensity. The servants who worked in aristocratic households like Pemberton Hall occupied a complex position in the aromatic hierarchy that reflected their proximity to wealth without actual access to it. Lady Pemberton's personal maid carried traces of her mistress's expensive perfumes on her clothing, and hands creating an aromatic signature that marked her elevated position among the servant class. Kitchen servants and other household workers carried the distinctive sense of their specific duties, cooking odors, cleaning preparations, and the various substances they handled in their daily work. These occupational aromas were overlaid with the general aromatic environment of the great house, creating complex scent profiles that marked the servant's position within the aristocratic world while clearly distinguishing them from their employers. The aromatic hierarchy extended to the very poorest members of London society who carried the intense human sense that resulted from limited access to washing facilities, soap, and clean clothing. These individuals were not excluded from society because of their aromatic intensity, but their scents clearly marked their position at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Beggars and other destitute people carried scent signatures that told the stories of their difficult lives. The musty smell of sleeping outdoors, the distinctive aromas of scavenged food, and the concentrated human odors that resulted from prolonged inability to wash. Yet even these extreme scents operated within the accepted parameters of 18th century life, as everyone understood the relationship between poverty and aromatic intensity. The clergy occupied their own unique position in the aromatic hierarchy with scent signatures that reflected their spiritual authority and social respectability. Parish priests carried the distinctive aromas of their calling incense from religious services. The musty smell of old books and parchment, and the particular combination of respectability and modest means that characterized their social position. Dr. Blackthorne's medical practice brought him into contact with people from all levels of the aromatic hierarchy, and his professional success depended partly on his ability to navigate these complex, scent-based social distinctions. His own aromatic signature was carefully managed to project medical authority and social respectability while maintaining the professional sense that marked him as a skilled physician. The doctor's understanding of social aromatic hierarchies influenced his diagnostic practices and treatment recommendations. He understood that different social classes had different aromatic norms, and he adjusted his medical advice accordingly. Treatments that might be appropriate for aristocratic patients would be modified for working-class individuals whose aromatic circumstances were fundamentally different. Professional men, like lawyers, clerks, and government officials, maintained aromatic signatures that reflected their education and social position while distinguishing them from both manual laborers and aristocratic leisure. These professionals used modest amounts of aromatic preparations to project competence and respectability without claiming social positions above their actual circumstances. The complex interplay between occupation, social class, and personal scent created a sophisticated system of social communication that operated largely through unconscious aromatic cues. People could assess others' social positions, occupations, and respectability through their scent signatures, creating immediate social understanding that guided interactions and expectations. This aromatic hierarchy was not static, but could change over time as individuals improved their social circumstances or fell from previous positions. Social mobility was often marked by changes in scent signature as people gained access to better aromatic preparations or lost the resources necessary to maintain previous standards. The understanding and navigation of these aromatic hierarchies required considerable social skill and cultural knowledge. Successful social interaction depended partly on the ability to project appropriate scent signatures while correctly interpreting the aromatic cues provided by others. This olfactory literacy was an essential aspect of social competence in 18th century society. Women faced particular challenges in managing their aromatic hierarchy positions as their scent signatures needed to project appropriate femininity while also indicating their social status and moral respectability. The balance between natural human scents and applied fragrances required careful management to avoid suggestions of impropriety or social climbing. The aromatic hierarchies of 18th century society created communities of scent that bound people together within social classes while clearly distinguishing between different levels of the social order. These olfactory communities shared common aromatic experiences and developed collective understanding of appropriate scent management within their particular social circumstances. In the learned circles of London's medical and philosophical communities, the phenomena of human scent and bodily odor were subjects of serious intellectual inquiry that shaped both medical practice and social understanding. Dr. Cornelius Blackthorne, like his colleagues at the Royal College of Physicians, operated within a comprehensive theoretical framework that explained the relationship between scent health and human nature in ways that would seem strange to modern understanding. The foundation of 18th century medical theory regarding scent was the ancient doctrine of the four humors, which held that human health depended on the proper balance of blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile within the body. According to this theory, each humor produced its own distinctive scents when properly balanced, and changes in bodily odor could indicate dangerous imbalances that required medical intervention. Dr. Blackthorne had been trained to diagnose medical conditions through careful attention to his patient's scents, and he had developed considerable expertise in interpreting the aromatic information that the human body provided. A patient with an excess of sanguine humor might emit the warm, slightly metallic scent associated with too much blood, while someone suffering from melancholic imbalance would carry the cooler, mustier odors that indicated an excess of black bile. The medical understanding of scent was closely connected to theories about the transmission of disease, which were based on the concept of miasma, or harmful vapors that could spread illness through the air. Dr. Blackthorne believed that many diseases were transmitted through bad-smelling air, and he carefully monitored the aromatic environments of his patients' homes and neighborhoods for signs of potential health hazards. This miasmic theory of disease transmission led to complex medical advice about managing personal and environmental scents. Dr. Blackthorne recommended that his patients avoid areas with strong odors that might indicate the presence of disease-causing vapors, while he also prescribed various aromatic treatments designed to purify the air and protect against illness. The medical profession's approach to bathing and personal cleanliness was based on theories about the body's natural protective mechanisms that would seem counterintuitive to modern understanding. Blackthorne believed that the natural oils and scents produced by healthy human skin served important protective functions, and he warned his patients against excessive washing that might strip away these beneficial substances. According to 18th century medical theory, the human body produced various aromatic substances that were essential for maintaining health and protecting against disease. These natural scents were believed to create protective barriers against harmful environmental influences, and their removal through frequent washing was thought to leave the body vulnerable to illness. Dr. Blackthorne's medical library contained numerous learned treatises on the relationship between scent and health, written by the leading physicians and natural philosophers of his era. These works presented detailed theories about how different aromas affected human health with elaborate classifications of beneficial and harmful scents that guided medical practice. The physician's understanding of aromatic medicine extended to the preparation and prescription of scented treatments that were designed to restore humoral balance and promote health. Dr. Blackthorne's study was filled with bottles containing various aromatic substances, herbs, spices, animal-derived scents, and mineral preparations that were used to create customized treatments for individual patients. The preparation of aromatic medicines was considered both an art and a science that required extensive knowledge of how different scents interacted with the human body. Dr. Blackthorne had spent years learning to combine various aromatic substances in ways that would produce therapeutic effects while avoiding harmful interactions between different scent components. The medical understanding of scent extended beyond individual health to encompass broader theories about the relationship between aromatic environments and social well-being. Dr. Blackthorne believed that communities with pleasant, balanced scent profiles were more likely to remain healthy, while areas characterized by offensive or unbalanced odors were prone to epidemic diseases. This medical theory influenced urban planning and public health recommendations in ways that shaped the aromatic environment of London itself. Medical authorities recommended that certain types of aromatic activities be located away from residential areas, while they encouraged the cultivation of aromatic gardens and the burning of pleasant-smelling substances to improve neighborhood health. The philosophical understanding of scent in 18th century intellectual circles was equally sophisticated, with learned men like Dr. Blackthorne engaging in detailed discussions about the relationship between aromatic experience and human consciousness. These discussions were influenced by the emerging empirical philosophy that emphasized the importance of sensory experience in understanding the world. Philosophers of the period debated whether scent was a fundamental aspect of reality or merely a subjective human experience, and these discussions had practical implications for how people understood their own aromatic relationships with their environment. Dr. Blackthorne believed that scent provided direct access to essential truths about health, character, and social relationships that could not be gained through other senses. The medical profession's approach to diagnosing character and temperament through scent analysis was based on sophisticated theories about the relationship between bodily constitution and personality. Dr. Blackthorne had been trained to identify personality types through careful analysis of his patients' natural aromatic signatures, and he used this information to guide both medical treatment and social advice. According to 18th century medical theory, people with sanguine temperaments produced warm, energetic scents that reflected their optimistic and sociable natures, while melancholic individuals emitted cooler, more subdued aromas that indicated their tendency toward introspection and sadness. These aromatic assessments influenced medical treatment recommendations and social expectations. The medical understanding of women's scent was particularly complex, involving theories about the relationship between feminine aromatic signatures and reproductive health. Dr. Blackthorne believed that healthy women produced distinctive scents that indicated their fertility and emotional balance, while various medical conditions could alter these natural aromatic patterns in ways that required treatment. Medical theories about children's scent development held that young people naturally produced clean, sweet aromas that indicated healthy growth and development. Changes in children's natural scent patterns were considered important diagnostic information that could indicate emerging health problems or developmental issues that required medical attention. The medical profession's approach to aging and scent involved detailed theories about how aromatic signatures change throughout the human lifespan. Dr. Blackthorne believed that elderly people naturally developed different scent profiles that reflected the wisdom and experience of age, and he warned against attempts to artificially maintain youthful aromatic characteristics through excessive use of cosmetics or perfumes. The relationship between social class and scent was understood within medical circles as reflecting fundamental differences in constitutional health and vitality. Dr. Blackthorne believed that aristocratic families naturally produced more refined aromatic signatures due to their superior breeding and living conditions, while working-class people's more intense scents reflected the constitutional effects of manual labor and limited resources. Medical education in the 18th century included extensive training in aromatic diagnosis that required students to develop sophisticated olfactory discrimination abilities. Dr. Blackthorne had spent years learning to distinguish between subtle variations in human scent that could indicate different medical conditions, and he continued to refine these skills throughout his professional career. The medical profession's understanding of occupational scents involved complex theories about how different types of work affected human aromatic signatures in both beneficial and harmful ways. Dr. Blackthorne believed that certain occupations produced scents that indicated healthy physical activity, while others created aromatic patterns that suggested potential health risks. Baker's work, like that performed by Thomas Whitworth, was generally considered beneficial from a medical perspective because the scents of bread making were associated with wholesome food production and honest labor. Dr. Blackthorne viewed the aromatic signature of bakers as indicating good health and moral character, though he also recognized that constant exposure to flour dust could create respiratory problems. The medical understanding of urban versus rural scent environments involved detailed theories about how different aromatic exposures affected human health and development. Dr. Blackthorne believed that city dwellers developed different constitutional characteristics than rural people due to their exposure to the complex aromatic environment of urban life. Medical theories about the therapeutic use of pleasant scents led to detailed recommendations for aromatic treatments that were designed to improve both physical and mental health. Dr. Blackthorne prescribed various scented preparations for patients suffering from nervous disorders, believing that carefully chosen aromatic exposures could restore emotional balance and promote psychological well-being. The medical profession's approach to perfume and cosmetic use involved complex judgments about when artificial scents were beneficial for health and when they might be harmful. Dr. Blackthorne generally approved of moderate use of pleasant-smelling cosmetic preparations, but he warned against excessive artificial scenting that might interfere with the body's natural aromatic functions. Medical theories about the relationship between diet and scent held that the foods people consumed directly influenced their bodily aromatic signatures in ways that could indicate both health status and moral character. Dr. Blackthorne believed that people who consumed wholesome, simple foods naturally developed pleasant scents, while those who indulged in rich or exotic foods might develop unbalanced aromatic profiles. The medical understanding of seasonal changes in human scent involved detailed theories about how natural cycles affected bodily aromatic production. Dr. Blackthorne observed that his patients' scent signatures changed predictably throughout the year, and he adjusted his medical treatments accordingly to support these natural aromatic rhythms. Medical education included instruction in the proper management of physicians' own aromatic signatures, as doctors needed to project appropriate professional scents while avoiding aromatic presentations that might undermine their medical authority. Dr. Blackthorne had learned to maintain an aromatic profile that suggested medical competence and social respectability while remaining sensitive to his patients' aromatic communications. The medical profession's understanding of aromatic compatibility between people involved theories about how different individual scent signatures interacted in social and medical contexts. Dr. Blackthorne believed that certain aromatic combinations could be either beneficial or harmful to health, and he sometimes made recommendations about social associations based on aromatic compatibility assessments. Medical theories about the relationship between emotional states and scent held that strong feelings directly influenced bodily aromatic production in ways that could be diagnostically useful. Dr. Blackthorne had learned to identify fear, anger, sadness, and joy through subtle changes in his patients' scent signatures, and he used this information to guide both medical treatment and psychological counseling. The medical profession's approach to managing epidemic diseases involved detailed theories about how aromatic environments could either promote or prevent the spread of illness. Dr. Blackthorne recommended various aromatic interventions during disease outbreaks, including the burning of specific herbs and the use of scented preparations that were believed to protect against contagion. Medical understanding of the relationship between cleanliness and health was more complex than simple hygiene, involving theories about how different types of cleaning affected the body's natural protective mechanisms. Dr. Blackthorne distinguished between beneficial cleaning that supported natural bodily functions and harmful cleaning that might disrupt essential aromatic balances. The medical profession's approach to treating scent-related complaints involved sophisticated theories about how aromatic imbalances could be corrected through targeted interventions. Dr. Blackthorne treated patients who complained of unpleasant personal odors through combinations of dietary changes, aromatic medicines, and lifestyle modifications designed to restore natural scent balance. The complex world of aromatic commerce in 1743 London represented one of the most sophisticated and profitable aspects of international trade, involving vast networks of merchants, suppliers, and craftsmen who created and distributed the scented products that shaped 18th century life. The economics of fragrance touched every level of society, from the expensive imported perfumes used by aristocrats to the simple herb-scented soaps available to working families. Master Aldrich Pembroke operated one of London's most prestigious perfume shops from premises near Covent Garden, catering to the wealthy merchants and minor aristocracy who could afford the expensive imported fragrances that marked their elevated social status. Master Pembroke's shop was itself an aromatic environment that demonstrated the exotic luxury of his trade, filled with the complex scents of flowers, spices, and animal-derived aromatic substances from around the world. The process of creating perfumes for Master Pembroke's clientele involved the careful blending of ingredients that had traveled thousands of miles to reach his workshop. Rose oil from Bulgaria, jasmine essence from France, sandalwood from India, and ambergris from whales hunted in distant oceans were combined according to secret formulas that Master Pembroke had developed over decades of experience in the aromatic arts. Master Pembroke's most expensive perfumes incorporated ambergris, a waxy substance produced in the digestive systems of sperm whales that was considered one of the most valuable aromatic materials in the world. A single ounce of high-quality ambergris could cost more than a working man's annual wages. Yet wealthy customers were willing to pay these extraordinary prices for the unique olfactory experience that ambergris provided. The international trade networks that supplied Master Pembroke's shop represented some of the most far-reaching commercial relationships of the 18th century. Rose oil came from Bulgarian producers who had perfected their techniques over generations, while musk arrived from Tibet and other remote regions where the aromatic glands of musk deer were harvested and processed according to traditional methods. The economics of the perfume trade were complicated by the perishable nature of many aromatic materials and the challenges of long-distance transportation in an era without refrigeration. Master Pembroke had developed relationships with trusted suppliers who understood the careful handling required to preserve delicate floral essences during journeys that might take months to complete. The pricing structure of Master Pembroke's perfumes reflected both the cost of imported ingredients and the sophisticated knowledge required to blend them successfully. His most expensive preparations cost the equivalent of several months' wages for skilled craftsmen. Yet wealthy customers viewed these perfumes as essential markers of their social status and cultural refinement. Master Pembroke's workshop employed several skilled assistants who had spent years learning the complex art of perfume creation. These craftsmen could distinguish between dozens of different aromatic materials by scent alone, and they understood the subtle chemical interactions that occurred when different scented substances were combined in various proportions. The process of creating a custom perfume for a wealthy client like Lady Pemberton involved multiple consultations and careful attention to the customer's individual aromatic preferences and social requirements. Master Pembroke would spend hours discussing scent preferences with Lady Pemberton, creating sample blends that could be tested and refined until the perfect aromatic composition was achieved. Lady Pemberton's annual expenditure on perfumes and scented cosmetics represented a significant portion of her household budget, yet she considered these purchases essential for maintaining her social position and personal satisfaction. Her perfume collection included seasonal fragrances designed for different social occasions, as well as everyday scents that complemented her natural aromatic signature. The middle-class market for aromatic products was served by traders like Samuel Whitmore, who operated a shop that sold less expensive but still respectable scented goods to merchant families and prosperous craftsmen. Samuel's inventory included locally produced perfumes, imported spices for personal use, and various aromatic preparations that allowed middle-class families to participate in the scented culture of their era. Samuel's approach to the aromatic trade involved finding ways to make exotic fragrances accessible to customers with limited budgets. He created perfume blends that used small amounts of expensive imported ingredients combined with less costly local materials, producing scented products that provided some of the luxury experience of aristocratic perfumes at prices that middle-class families could afford. The process of marketing aromatic products to middle-class customers required Samuel to understand their complex social aspirations and practical limitations. His perfumes needed to be sophisticated enough to mark their users as respectable and cultured, yet affordable enough to fit within modest household budgets, and appropriate enough to avoid suggestions of social climbing. Samuel's customers, like Elizabeth Hartwell, made careful choices about their aromatic purchases based on both personal preferences and social considerations. Elizabeth's selection of floral waters and scented powders reflected her desire to enhance her natural feminine appeal while maintaining the modest respectability appropriate to her social station. The working-class market for aromatic products was served by vendors like Mary Thompson, who sold simple scented soaps, herb-based preparations, and other basic aromatic goods at weekly markets throughout London. Mary's trade involved providing affordable access to the pleasant scents that even poor families desired, creating products that offered aromatic enhancement within the constraints of very limited budgets. Mary's aromatic products were based primarily on locally available herbs and simple preparation techniques that kept costs low while still providing the scented experiences that her customers valued. Her herb-scented soaps, lavender waters, and rosemary preparations offered working families the opportunity to participate in the aromatic culture of their society without exceeding their economic means. The process of creating aromatic products for working-class customers required Mary to understand the specific needs and preferences of people whose lives were shaped by hard physical labor and limited resources. Her preparations needed to complement rather than compete with the occupational scents that marked her customers' daily lives. Margaret Whitworth's occasional purchases from Mary Thompson's stall reflected the careful economic calculations that working families made about aromatic expenditures. Margaret would save small amounts over several weeks to purchase herb-scented soap or floral water for special occasions, treating these aromatic luxuries as important but affordable enhancements to her daily life. The international spice trade that supplied London's aromatic markets represented one of the most profitable and competitive aspects of 18th century commerce. Merchants like Jonathan Blackwell had built fortunes by importing cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and other aromatic spices from distant tropical regions where these valuable substances were produced under carefully guarded conditions. The economics of spice trading involved enormous risks and potentially enormous profits, as successful shipments of aromatic spices could yield returns that justified the dangers of long ocean voyages and the uncertainties of international commerce. Jonathan Blackwell had invested in multiple trading ventures, spreading his risks across different aromatic commodities and different shipping routes. The aromatic spices that arrived in London's warehouses were used for both culinary and cosmetic purposes, creating dual markets that increased demand and supported high prices for high-quality aromatic materials. Cinnamon might be used in cooking expensive dishes for wealthy households, while also serving as an ingredient in luxury perfumes and scented cosmetics. The processing and distribution of imported spices involved networks of specialized craftsmen who understood how to preserve and enhance the aromatic qualities of these valuable materials. Spice merchants employed workers who could assess the quality of aromatic spices by scent alone, ensuring that only the finest materials reached the most discriminating customers. The retail spice trade in London involved complex relationships between wholesalers, retailers, and customers that were based on trust, expertise, and reputation. Spice merchants like James Whitmore had spent years building relationships with suppliers and customers based on their ability to provide consistently high-quality aromatic products at fair prices. The seasonal nature of spice imports created cyclical patterns in aromatic markets that influenced both prices and availability throughout the year. James Whitmore had learned to anticipate these cycles, building inventory during periods of abundance and managing supplies carefully during times when fresh shipments were unavailable. The domestic production of aromatic materials represented an important but often overlooked aspect of the 18th century scent economy. English lavender grown in fields around London provided affordable aromatic material that was used in everything from simple perfumes to household cleaning preparations. Rural producers like farmer William Ashworth had developed specialized knowledge of aromatic plant cultivation that allowed them to supply London's markets with locally produced scented materials. William's lavender fields produced aromatic harvests that were processed into oils, dried flowers, and other scented products that served both luxury and everyday markets. The processing of domestic aromatic materials involved traditional techniques that had been passed down through generations of rural craftsmen. William Ashworth's family had been producing lavender oil for over a century, perfecting distillation methods that maximize the aromatic yield from their carefully cultivated crops. The marketing of domestic aromatic products required William Ashworth to compete with exotic imported materials while emphasizing the particular qualities of English-grown aromatic plants. His lavender preparations were marketed as providing pure, wholesome scents that reflected the character of English countryside and traditional values. The economic impact of the aromatic trade extended far beyond the direct participants in scent commerce, influencing everything from shipping and insurance to retail trade and consumer spending patterns. The demand for aromatic products created employment for thousands of workers in related industries and contributed significantly to London's position as an international trading center. The regulation of aromatic commerce involved complex negotiations between guild organizations, government authorities, and international trading partners who needed to balance quality control, fair pricing, and competitive advantages. The Worshipful Company of Grocers maintained standards for imported spices, while perfume makers operated under guild regulations that protected both craftsmen and consumers. The taxation of aromatic imports provided significant revenue for the British government while also influencing the pricing and availability of scented products throughout the social hierarchy. Import duties on luxury perfume ingredients kept prices high for expensive aromatic materials while encouraging the development of domestic alternatives. The credit and financing arrangements that supported aromatic commerce involved sophisticated financial instruments that allowed merchants to manage the risks and delays associated with long-distance trade in perishable scented materials. Master Pembroke maintained relationships with London's leading banks and financial houses to support his expensive inventory investments. The insurance of aromatic shipments represented a specialized aspect of maritime commerce that required underwriters to understand the particular risks associated with transporting delicate scented materials across dangerous ocean routes. Lloyd's of London had developed expertise in insuring aromatic cargoes, creating specialized policies that reflected the unique challenges of the perfume trade. The economic cycles that influenced aromatic markets were shaped by factors ranging from weather conditions in distant growing regions to changing fashion preferences among wealthy consumers in European capitals. Master Pembroke had learned to anticipate these cycles, adjusting his inventory and pricing strategies to maintain profitability despite market volatility. The social and economic mobility that aromatic commerce provided for successful traders represented one of the paths by which merchant families could improve their social status and economic circumstances. Successful perfume merchants like Master Pembroke often invested their profits in land and other assets that could support claims to genteel status for their families. Within the private chambers and personal spaces where 18th century people conducted their most intimate daily activities, the aromatic environment took on qualities that were both more intense and more personal than the public scent experiences that characterize social interaction. These private aromatic spaces were where individuals could experience their own and their family's natural scents without the mediation of social expectations or public performance. Margaret Whitworth's bedchamber above the bakery represented a typical example of intimate 18th century aromatic space where the accumulated sense of daily life created an olfactory environment that was both comforting in its familiarity and overwhelming in its intensity. The small room had not been thoroughly aired in months, and every surface had absorbed the complex mixture of human and environmental odors that characterized the Whitworth household. The bed that Margaret shared with her husband Thomas was the centerpiece of their private aromatic world, a space where their individual scent signatures combined and concentrated over the course of each night's sleep. The straw mattress had absorbed years of human presence, creating a deep-seated aromatic foundation that was unique to their marriage and their household. The process of retiring for sleep each evening involved the gradual intensification of personal scents as clothing was removed and bodies were confined within the close quarters of the marriage bed. Margaret's nightgown, worn for several nights before being changed, carried the accumulated aromas of multiple sleep cycles, creating an intimate, aromatic garment that was saturated with her personal scent. Thomas's presence in the shared bed added his own complex, aromatic signature to the intimate space they occupied together. His body carried the distinctive sense of his bakery work even hours after the day's labor had ended, creating a masculine, aromatic contribution that complemented Margaret's more subtle personal aromas. The marriage bed's aromatic environment was further intensified by the heavy wool blankets that provided warmth during cold nights. These blankets, rarely washed and constantly absorbing human scents, created an enclosed aromatic space that concentrated and preserved the intimate sense of the couple's shared sleep. The morning process of emerging from this intensely aromatic environment involved a gradual readjustment to the less concentrated sense of daily life. Margaret's body carried traces of the night's aromatic concentration throughout the morning, creating a personal scent signature that was more intense immediately after sleep than it would become later in the day. The chamber pot that served the Whitworths' nighttime sanitary needs added its own distinctive aromatic contribution to their private space. The ceramic vessel, emptied weekly but retaining permanent aromatic traces of its function, represented one of the most intimate aspects of 18th century domestic life that modern people often overlook in their understanding of historical daily experience. Lady Pemberton's aristocratic bedchamber represented a more elaborate but fundamentally similar approach to intimate aromatic space, where luxury and refinement created complex olfactory environments that were nonetheless based on the same principles of accumulated human scent that characterized all 18th century living spaces. Lady Pemberton's four-poster bed was an aromatic environment of extraordinary complexity, where expensive silk hangings and down-filled mattresses created an enclosed space that concentrated and preserved the sophisticated scent signatures of aristocratic life. The bed hangings, made from imported silk and never washed, had absorbed months of accumulated aromatic traces from Lady Pemberton's elaborate beauty preparations. The aristocratic approach to intimate scent management involved the use of expensive aromatic preparations that were designed to enhance rather than mask the natural human aromas that characterized private life. Lady Pemberton's bedtime routine included the application of scented oils and powders that would perfume her body and bedding throughout the night. Lady Pemberton's silk nightgowns were themselves aromatic garments that carried the complex scent signatures of aristocratic femininity. These garments were changed more frequently than those worn by lower social classes, but they still accumulated several nights' worth of intimate aromatic traces before being replaced with fresh alternatives. The aristocratic marriage bed served as a space where the elaborate aromatic constructions of public life gave way to more natural expressions of human scent. Lady Pemberton's husband could experience his wife's fundamental aromatic signature beneath the layers of expensive perfumes and cosmetics that characterized her public appearance. The process of aristocratic morning toilette involved the reconstruction of public aromatic identity after a night of more natural scent expression. Lady Pemberton's maid worked to restore her mistress's elaborate aromatic signature through the careful application of powders, perfumes, and cosmetic preparations that would transform her from private woman to public aristocrat. The contrast between aristocratic and working class intimate aromatic spaces reflected differences in resources and social expectations rather than fundamental differences in the human aromatic experience. Both Lady Pemberton and Margaret Whitworth shared the basic human condition of natural scent production that was intensified and concentrated within the intimate spaces of their private lives. Dr. Blackthorne's medical practice brought him into intimate contact with the private aromatic environments of his patients, providing him with professional insights into the most personal aspects of 18th century life. His house calls required him to enter bedchambers and other private spaces where the concentrated sense of daily life reached levels that challenged even his professionally trained nose. The diagnostic information that Dr. Blackthorne gathered from his patients' intimate aromatic environments was considered essential medical intelligence that could reveal health problems and emotional states that might not be apparent through other forms of examination. The sense of a patient's bedchamber could indicate everything from dietary imbalances to underlying diseases that required medical attention. Dr. Blackthorne's own intimate aromatic environment reflected his professional status and medical theories about proper health maintenance. His bedchamber was treated with aromatic preparations that were designed to promote healthy sleep and prevent disease, creating a private space that demonstrated his application of medical theory to his own personal life. The physician's marriage bed served as a space where his professional understanding of aromatic health intersected with his personal intimate relationships. Dr. Blackthorne's wife had learned to appreciate and participate in the complex aromatic theories that guided her husband's approach to both professional and private life. The intimate aromatic environments of families with children presented particular challenges and complexities that reflected the intersection of adult and childhood scent signatures within shared domestic spaces. The Hartwell family's single sleeping room accommodated the aromatic presence of 4 different people whose individual scent characteristics combined in ways that created a unique household olfactory signature. William Hartwell's return from his daily work at the merchant's office brought the aromatic traces of commercial London into the intimate space his family shared for sleeping and privacy. His clothing carried the scents of the counting house ink parchment and human interactions that marked his professional activities. Elizabeth Hartwell's intimate aromatic presence reflected her dual roles as wife and mother, carrying scent signatures that combine maternal nurturing activities with her own personal aromatic needs and preferences. Her body and clothing told the story of daily domestic labor through the accumulated sense of cooking, cleaning, and child care. The children's contribution to the family's intimate aromatic environment reflected the particular scent characteristics of youth in an era when frequent bathing was considered dangerous. James and Mary Hartwell carried the distinctive aromas of active childhood, intensified by their shared sleeping arrangements and limited access to washing facilities. The family's shared chamber pot served as a focal point for the most intimate aspects of domestic aromatic life, representing the reality of limited sanitary facilities that forced families to accommodate natural bodily functions within their private living spaces. The management of these intimate aromatic challenges required understanding and acceptance that modern families have largely forgotten. The seasonal variations in intimate aromatic environments reflected the changing challenges of maintaining personal comfort and privacy throughout the annual cycle of weather and social activity. Winter's cold drove families into closer proximity within heated spaces, intensifying intimate aromatic experiences while limiting the natural ventilation that provided some relief during warmer months. The economic constraints that shaped working class, intimate, aromatic environments created challenges that required creative solutions and family cooperation to maintain acceptable levels of comfort and privacy. The Hartwell family's limited resources meant that aromatic challenges had to be addressed through behavioral adaptations rather than expensive material solutions. The social expectations that governed intimate aromatic behavior varied significantly between different social classes and family structures, but all 18th century people shared the basic challenge of managing intense personal scents within the confined spaces of domestic life. These shared experiences created common understanding and acceptance of aromatic realities that transcended social boundaries. The intimate aromatic environments of elderly people presented particular characteristics that reflected both the natural changes of aging and the accumulated effects of lifetimes spent within the aromatic culture of 18th century society. Old Martha Gibbons, who worked as a mudlark along the Thames, carried in her private spaces the concentrated scent memories of decades of urban life. Martha's single room near the London docks was an aromatic repository that contained the accumulated scents of a lifetime spent in intimate contact with the city's most challenging olfactory environments. Her bedding, clothing, and personal possessions had absorbed decades of exposure to the Thames riverbank, creating an intimate space that was both intensely personal and profoundly urban. The contrast between the intimate aromatic environments of youth and age reflected the natural progression of human scent signatures throughout the lifespan. Young people like Mary Hartwell carried the fresh, clean aromas that were associated with health and vitality, while older individuals like Martha Gibbons had developed the more complex, concentrated scent signatures that marked long experience and accumulated life history. The intimate aromatic spaces of single individuals differed significantly from those of married couples and families, reflecting the different social and personal needs of people who lived alone. Bachelor clerks, unmarried serving women, and other single people created intimate aromatic environments that were shaped by individual preferences rather than family negotiations. The privacy that intimate aromatic spaces provided was essential for the psychological and physical well-being of 18th century people, offering relief from the intense social performance that characterized public life. Within their private chambers, individuals could experience their own natural scent signatures without the need to modify or enhance them for social consumption. The morning emergence from intimate aromatic spaces into the public world required gradual readjustment to the different olfactory expectations and social requirements that governed interaction with others. This daily transition from private to public scent identity was a fundamental aspect of 18th century life that shaped both individual experience and social relationships. As the sun set over London on this day in 1743, the aromatic tapestry of urban life underwent its daily transformation from the intense public sense of commerce and social interaction to the more intimate aromas of domestic life and personal privacy. The people who inhabited this world, from aristocrats like Lady Pemberton to workers like Margaret Whitworth, were unconscious participants in an olfactory culture so complex and pervasive that it shaped every aspect of their daily experience. The aromatic intensity of 18th century life represented a fundamental difference between their world and our own that goes far beyond simple matters of hygiene and cleanliness. These people lived within an olfactory environment that was both overwhelming in its complexity and completely normal to their adapted senses. Their relationship with human scent was based on acceptance enhancement and social communication rather than elimination and avoidance. The sophisticated understanding that 18th century people developed about aromatic social communication created communities bound together by shared olfactory experiences and common approaches to scent management. They could read social status, occupation, health, and character through aromatic cues that modern people have largely lost the ability to interpret. The medical and philosophical theories that shaped 18th century approaches to scent and cleanliness operated within intellectual frameworks that emphasized balanced natural function and the integration of human beings within their environmental context. Their understanding of the relationship between scent and health was complex and sophisticated, even though it was based on medical theories that modern science has largely replaced. The economic systems that supported the production, distribution, and consumption of aromatic products created international networks of trade and commerce that connected London to the most distant parts of the world. The demand for exotic perfumes, spices, and scented materials drove exploration, colonization, and economic development in ways that shaped the modern world. The intimate aspects of 18th century aromatic life, the private spaces where people experienced their own and their family's natural scents without social mediation, represented the foundation upon which all public aromatic behavior was built. Understanding these intimate realities helps explain how people of this era developed the tolerance and acceptance necessary to function within such an intensely scented world. The seasonal rhythms that shaped aromatic experience throughout the year created natural cycles of intensity and relief that influenced everything from social behavior to medical practice to economic activity. People plan their lives around these predictable changes in olfactory environment, developing strategies for managing aromatic challenges and taking advantage of aromatic opportunities. The social hierarchies expressed through scent created complex systems of communication and identification that operated largely below the level of conscious awareness. These aromatic social codes were as important as clothing, speech, or behavior in determining social relationships and individual identity within 18th century society. The professional and occupational communities that shared common aromatic signatures, bakers, doctors, merchants, servants, developed distinctive cultural identities that were expressed and maintained through their characteristic scents. These occupational aromas were sources of pride and professional identification rather than embarrassment or concealment. The technological and material limitations that shaped 18th century approaches to cleanliness and scent management created challenges that required innovative solutions and adaptive strategies. People developed sophisticated techniques for managing aromatic environments and personal scents within the constraints of their available resources and theoretical understanding. The generational transmission of aromatic knowledge and practice created cultural continuities that connected people to their ancestors and their descendants through shared olfactory traditions. Children learned to understand and navigate their aromatic world through example and instruction that prepared them for adult participation in scented society. The gender differences in aromatic expectations and practices reflected broader social assumptions about masculine and feminine nature, while creating opportunities for personal expression and social communication through scent choices and management strategies. Both men and women participated in complex aromatic cultures that were appropriate to their social roles and individual circumstances. The regional and international variations in aromatic culture that influenced London's diverse population created a cosmopolitan olfactory environment where different traditions and practices coexisted and influenced each other. The city's aromatic character was shaped by the contributions of people from throughout Britain and from around the world. The psychological and emotional aspects of 18th century aromatic experience created intimate connections between scent and memory identity and social belonging that were essential aspects of human experience. People's relationships with their own and other scents were deeply embedded in their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. The artistic and cultural expressions of aromatic experience in literature, music, and visual arts reflected the central importance of scent in 18th century consciousness and social understanding. The olfactory world was not simply accepted, but was actively celebrated and explored through creative expression. The gradual changes that would eventually transform 18th century aromatic culture were already beginning to emerge in 1743, though their full impact would not be felt for decades or centuries to come. The seeds of modern attitudes toward cleanliness, hygiene, and scent management were present, but had not yet challenged the fundamental assumptions that governed 18th century life. The legacy of 18th century aromatic culture continues to influence modern understanding of cleanliness, personal care, and social interaction in ways that are often unrecognized, but nonetheless significant. Our contemporary relationships with scent and smell have been shaped by historical developments that began during this period and continue to evolve today. Understanding the aromatic world of 18th century London provides insights into fundamental aspects of human nature and social organization that transcend specific historical periods. The ways in which people adapt to and create meaning within their sensory environments reveals essential truths about human adaptability, creativity, and social cooperation. The story of how people in 1743 smelled and why no one noticed is ultimately a story about the remarkable human capacity to create meaning, beauty, and social connection within any set of environmental circumstances. Their world was not simply more aromatic than ours. It was differently aromatic with its own sophisticated systems of understanding, managing, and appreciating the complex olfactory environment that surrounded them. As we conclude this exploration of a forgotten world, we might reflect on what we have lost, as well as what we have gained in our modern transformation of human aromatic experience. The people of 1743 possessed forms of sensory awareness, social understanding, and environmental integration that our sanitized world has largely abandoned. Their story reminds us that human experience is far more varied and adaptable than our contemporary assumptions might suggest. The aromatic world of 18th century London was not a primitive precursor to modern cleanliness, but a sophisticated alternative approach to human scent and social organization. Their methods were different from ours. Their understanding was based on different theories, and their results created different experiences, but their world was no less valid or meaningful than our own. In remembering their world, we honor the complexity and adaptability of human experience while gaining perspective on our own aromatic assumptions and practices. The people of 1743 navigated their intensely scented world with grace, understanding, and social cooperation that enabled them to create meaningful lives within circumstances that we might find challenging. Their story continues to unfold in the aromatic traces they left behind in the buildings they inhabited, the objects they used, and the cultural patterns they established. Though their world is gone, its memory lingers in the complex relationship between human beings and the scented environment we continue to create and inhabit together.